Welcome, everyone, to High Side, Low Side, Season 6, Episode 5. My name is Spenser Robert, and before you freak out, don't panic. This is the same podcast that you know and love, but I am guest hosting today. And for those of you who don't know me, you don't recognize my name, face, or voice, perhaps. Well, I'm a video producer here at RevZilla. I have been on the podcast a couple of times, and I have the privilege of chatting today with, of course, Spurgeon Dunbar. And the reason I'm here is because our colleague / amigo, Zach Quartz, went and had himself a baby. So, round of applause, everyone, for Zach Quartz, and more importantly, his wife. And while Zach is at home Googling things like how to father and God, oh God, what is that smell? Help, it's in my eyes. Spurgeon and I are going to be here, keeping the conversation going. We've got a great topic for today. The big question that we're going to be tackling is, what is a dual sport? And why does it matter? Why is it important? And it may seem like a simple question, but it has kind of a complicated answer, I think. And to help us unpack that answer is none other than our other colleague / amigo, Patrick Garvin from J&P Cycles. And Patrick is no stranger to pushing the boundaries of the definition of dual sport, so he is the perfect guest to have this conversation. And in addition to all that, Spurgeon and I are going to tackle the Not the News segment, where we're very excited to announce the release of a film that is both relevant to dual sports and kind of newsworthy. So stick around for that. We're also going to play a round of Rev Trivia, which is the game sweeping the nation, where we try and guess a motorcycle make and model based only on engine sounds and probably clues from our producer Chase, because none of us are very good at this. And of course, stick around to the end, because we're going to give away a t-shirt to some listeners who have left this review in particular, I think, is basically perfect. You guys will agree, no doubt. And we're going to go over some listener comments and questions, including one comment about a spooky tale of seller's remorse. So that's it. I think we've got a heck of a show lined up, and we do have to keep the lights on in this place. We need to buy some diapers for Zach. So without further ado, a word from our sponsor, from Spurgeon Dunbar.
So Motul has been the sponsor for High Side, Low Side for many a season now, and really an important note here is that Ari Henning is a fan because Motul helps you keep your chains clean, and they do so with these very convenient Motul chain clean care kits. You can get them for on-road or off-road. I particularly like the off-road ones for dual sport motorcycles, sticking with the theme of today's program. But they come with gloves so you don't get your hands dirty, a little brush to clean your chain, as well as a chain cleaner and a chain lube. The chain lube is either for on-road or for off-road, and you get a little Motul sticker as well. So if you are looking to stock up on some chain cleaner and lube, and maybe you need a brush to help you along the process there, you should check out Motul Chain Clean Care Kits, and you can do so over at RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. Let's get on with the program. Welcome to the episode, Spenser. I know we've had you on the podcast before, but you are now sitting in the hot seat. You have to go toe to toe with me and keep me in line. Every time I want to talk about KTMs, you have to reel me back in. Are you up for the challenge?
Yeah, I think so. It's so fun to see how the sausage is made. I see on my little print off here that it says pre-show banter. So it's happening. I'm pre-show bantering with Spurgeon. It's very exciting.
Well, I think it's going to be even more challenging because we're bringing Spenser in for an episode on dual sports, and you've never had to really, well, that's not true. You've reined me in before as a producer on some of the videos that we've created. So I trust that anytime I start to go off on my, orange bike tangents, you'll be like, listen, man, let's get back on track and talk about Yamahas or,
I don't know. I think for the audience, they've come to know and expect that you're going to go off on a KTM tangent. It's really like white noise. I think people have like Spurgeon talking about KTM for 9 hours CD tracks that they just fall asleep to. So I wouldn't want to deprive them of that lovely opportunity.
So speaking of depriving from opportunities, let's get into the Not the News segment today. So the Not the News that we have here is not about KTM. So Spenser, you're not going to have to reel me in. It's about KLR 650s and the gentleman who rode them from Alaska all the way down to Argentina. Most notably, they went through the Darien Gap, which is a little 40-mile chunk of jungle connecting the areas
Panama
of Central,
and Colombia. Yeah,
the Central America to South America. So the film was called Where the Road Ends. We actually licensed it and released it on our YouTube channel about a week ago now. And you were the executive producer on the program or on the production, Spence. So can you walk us through what the essence of the film was about?
Sure. Well, yeah, as you said, we kind of came into the project late, so very convenient for me that I get to put my name on the film, but I didn't actually have to go and get trench foot in the jungle. So that's a win-win scenario. But I think, like a lot of people, I heard about Wayne and his crew tackling this trip a number of years ago. I think they did it in 2017, 2018, and immediately, as someone who had read Obsessions Die Hard by Ed Culberson and who has been fascinated with the Darien Gap for as long as I can remember, I was just totally engaged with the story, and I wanted to see what happened. I wanted to see footage of the Darien Gap, this mythical place in the world of motorcycling. And then the film didn't come out for a while, and I was wondering what happened, and we ended up reaching out to them, and luckily, yeah, we were just able to help them get it finished. It was a huge project. They filmed for months and months and months. So basically, we were able to leverage some of our experience editing things and producing things, and the fact that we just have an awesome release platform, and get the film all buttoned up and out into the world. So I'm very excited that it's out there. I can only imagine how Wayne and the director Jake and the rest of the crew feel after all the actual work that they put into it. But yeah, I hope people have a chance to check it out, and it's fun that we at RevZilla have done something newsworthy enough to make it here on Not the News.
Well, I think it ties in with the episode's theme today of dual sport motorcycles, and I think in a true, Not the News segment where we try to, kind of dive in with some of our opinions and thoughts, really what captivated me about this was I wasn't as familiar with the Darien Gap as it sounds like you were, and I went back and I kind of went down a rabbit hole when we started, working with Wayne and his crew on this project. And one of the stories that I read was actually in a Roden, I think it was Roden Track, did an article where back in the 60s when Chevy introduced the Corvair, they actually took, I think, 3 Corvairs through the Darien Gap. And when I say took them through the Darien Gap is a jungle. They basically towed essentially 3 Corvairs through the jungle, and it took them months to do it. And I don't think there's one Corvair that's still in the jungle. And I reached out to Spenser very excitedly, and I was like, we should go and do a video of our own going through the Darien Gap, and we should make it like a trip to find the lost Corvair. And there's pictures of this. You can see it online. And then after I was trying to convince Spenser to do this, I read an article and a story from, it was, I have it written down here, from, I think it was Helge Peterson, who rode through on a BMW R80 GS back in the day. I think I have that correct, but the real takeaway there wasn't the motorcycle, it wasn't the fact that he made it through. It was the fact that there was a portion of the story where they talked about how every night at camp they would pull ticks off of themselves, and usually it was anywhere from 100 to 150 ticks that they were pulling off of one another at night. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I don't know if that sounds like the kind of trip that I want to partake on. And I think I called Spenser back and I was like, maybe this isn't the best idea.
And I said, too late. We've already booked our tickets. Trench foot and ticks on your back, coming in hot.
Well, let me ask you a question, Spenser. So in the film, Wayne and his crew go through the Darien and make their trip on KLR 650s, which is a beloved dual sport motorcycle. Mm-hmm. If you were given the opportunity to go through the Darien Gap, and not as a producer, not as someone that wants to watch Zach or Ari or myself cry and work harder, because I have a feeling you'd be more masochistic with your response in that regard. But if you had to go through the Darien Gap yourself on a motorcycle, what dual sport motorcycle would you choose?
Oh, man. Well, I'm kind of glad you asked this, though I hesitate to say it out loud because I have an idea for a video in the Darien Gap that I've wanted to do for years. So I'm going to say it out loud now so there's public record, because I've been terrified that someone was going to beat me to this idea. But I don't have the skill personally to do this. However, I have always thought it would be cool to see someone who is an actual professional off-road or enduro rider on a legitimate bike, like whatever, some KTM 300 two-stroke, as much as it pains me to say that to you, tackle the Darien Gap. Like what could Taddy Blazusiak do if he was on a KTM 300 and he could scout the lines? How could he get all the way through it? Because most people you talk to about the Darien Gap, and the film shows a lot of this, is it's more so that you end up pushing your bike through the Darien Gap, not as much riding through the Darien Gap. So I would love to see someone with the highest level of skill on the most sort of like tip of the spear enduro motorcycle available will tackle what is considered one of the most difficult, unpassable bits of terrain for a motorcyclist in the whole world. So that's a little bit of a cop-out. I wouldn't do it, but I would definitely film someone doing that.
So what a plot twist we have so early in the episode.
I
You,
know.
Spencer, Robert, are hailing KTM products, and I'm just sitting here saying, pick any dual sport motorcycle. I didn't see it coming.
Well, I took Zach's job, and now I'm coming for yours, Spurge.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I would have probably opted to do this on something smaller than a KLR 650. What comes to mind is probably, my personal KTM 350 is something that's a little bit more lightweight and a little bit more manageable. I don't know if you would be able to pack it down as appropriately. And like you said, I think the question is could you go down there and maybe get through it faster? So you're not camping in the jungle for days at a time. I mean, it's only a 45-mile stretch, and I think about all the crazy enduros and dual sports that I've done that are 60 miles, and I'm just thinking to myself, well, I wonder if I could just make it through the whole thing, in one day in 40 miles. But based on what we saw in the film, it doesn't seem like that would be an appropriate plan to go in there with only enough water and food for one day and convince yourself that you could do it. So
yeah, and I will say I don't remember their names, but I do remember reading about two people that did it on Rokons, which I think is a pretty good choice. You've got two-wheel drive. They're pretty small. Allegedly, you can float them across a river because they've got big balloon tires. So, Spurgeon, if you want to go down there with a couple of Rokons, I say let's make it happen.
So there we go. Let's do it. I'm down there for Rokons. So you heard it. Spencer is willing to ride through the Darien Gap. He's going to do it on a Rokon. We're going to do it together. Maybe once Zach is back from his paternity leave, we'll get him and Ari to join in as well. And we'll go down there with four of us and a bunch of Rokons, and we'll just have some fun.
Fantastic. Everything you say on a podcast is legally binding, right?
Yeah. I'm sure that's exactly the first trip that Zach wants to take as a father, is just head down to the old South American jungles and see if he can make it back alive.
Yeah, his wife will love that.
Anyway, that is our Not the News for the day. If you want to check out the film, it is available on RevZilla's YouTube channel. It's called Where the Road Ends, with Wayne Mitchell and his entire crew. And they did make it through the Darien Gap. They had some trials and some tribulations along the way, but you can check that film out. But now, what do you say we get Patrick Garvin on the episode and we talk about dual sport motorcycles?
Let's do it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the legend, Patrick Garvin. How's it going? Thank you for joining us.
It's awesome. Thanks for having me back. Looks like Spurgeon has upgraded in co-hosts.
I have, yeah. You've noticed.
You flatter me, and your check is in the mail. Thank you very much. Well, today we are talking about the question, what is a dual sport? And Patrick, having heard some of your tales of dual sport boundary pushing, I hope it's okay to describe some of your motorcycles in that way. I'm very excited to get your perspective on whether or not there is a rigid definition of dual sports, if there is a scientific definition of dual sports, because I think we end up seeing people use that in sort of a loose way, even though there is a kind of historical way it's been used. So, like gut instinct, what's been your relationship with the term dual sport?
I've used what would probably be considered all the wrong motorcycles as dual sports to finally end up at buying like the right motorcycles, I guess, the quote unquote right motorcycles for a dual sport. So yeah, I've turned all the motorcycles you probably shouldn't use as dual sports into dual sports.
So
Nice.
It's interesting. So this question really started a few episodes ago. We had talked about a Not the News episode, and some of the questions surrounding dual sport sales in America. And for those of you listening to the podcast, I'm using air quotes to kind of highlight the fact that in America, and I'm speaking specifically to America because I honestly don't know how some of this stuff is classified in other countries. But a dual sport motorcycle is anything that's designed to go on or off road. So that often includes not just a KLR 650, but it also includes a BMW R1250 GS. So adventure bikes are technically dual sports from a definition standpoint, as it pertains to how these bikes are being tracked when they're sold, right?
From the manufacturer's perspective, right? Like how they're labeling them.
Yeah. So I guess, do we agree with that definition? Like to you, Spencer, to you, Patrick, what is the definition of a dual sport motorcycle?
To me, it's an off-road bike that is street legal. Like that's the simplest way to distill it in my vernacular. It's an off-road bike that is legal to be driven on public roads.
So you lean a bit more on the off-road side of the equation?
100%. When I think of a dual sport bike, I think of a bike that I can use to hop on a 2-lane paved road to get to where I'm going to access good dirt trails.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves because we are going to basically talk about our personal definition for dual sports, which I think does vary person to person a little bit. The scientific, aka Wikipedia definition of a dual sport is a motorcycle. It is a street legal motorcycle that is designed for both on and off-road use. The terms all-road, on/off-road, and dual purpose are also used for this class of motorcycles. Dual sports are equipped with street legal equipment such as lights, speedometer, mirrors, horn, license plate, mounting, and muffler. It'd be weird to have a motorcycle with absolutely no muffler, but in any case, therefore it can be licensed and registered. So they are saying it is on-road, off-road very broadly, but specifically, it is an off-road vehicle or an off-road motorcycle with street legal equipment. So I just want to put that out there as the very authoritarian Wikipedia definition of a dual sport, which I think is fairly correct. I think that's in the ballpark.
Well, I want to say, I think the audience should recognize that Spenser is doing a great job of channeling his inner Mr. Quartz, because I apparently was skipping ahead to topic question number 3 on our little sheet of paper where I was like, let's just get into like what we think the topics are. And Spenser rightly and humbly just was like, hey, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. So great job, Spenser. I'm going to have a little scorecard over here, and we're I'm going to make a little notch every time you successfully, do what Zach normally does, which is wrangle the podcast back in.
So Zach's job is super easy.
Yeah.
I'm
give
going
you a
to
little
expect.
there.
I'm going. If you're going to be Zach, I need you to do at least one Spurgeon Dunbar impersonation, and reference a KTM 990. Scott, both of those things should happen.
Is that where he does like Spurgeon Dunbar?
Oh, you nailed it. See.
Okay. Wow.
I'm gonna give you a little notch on my Zach Quartz imitation sheet. So
Zach Quartz bingo. Here we go.
Okay. Anyway, on with the podcast, people. Spenser, you have 2 notches, just not that we're keeping score. You're doing a great job. So what would we say, and now that Spenser has the historical definition out of the way, and we know exactly how Wikipedia defines a dual sport motorcycle, what would we consider the first dual sport motorcycle to be?
Patrick?
I was thinking a little bit about this, and just motorcycle kind of labels in general are really interesting to me. On like, oh, what's a scrambler and what's a dual sport, and so that kind of sent me down the road of I was thinking about old Triumphs, right? Like the TR6 in the late '60s, and then like Yamaha's DT1 is it. To me, I think if you're kind of the classic,
So for those of you listening, Spenser is pointing behind him where there sits a Yamaha DT1 in various states of repair.
What will be a Yamaha DT1, yeah. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, that's so I started thinking of, just, old bikes that were ridden in the desert and things like that. And then I was, went down the Triumph path. But really, I think that Yamaha DT1, in my estimation, might be the first kind of like true dual sport as far as like a off-road bike equipped with legal on-road technology, so to speak.
So I think it is interesting because the technology for what was needed to be legal on the road has changed drastically throughout history as well. And so I can understand your argument there. I too started with Triumph, and I think my heart kind of sticks in that early to mid to late 60s desert racing, time period of, Triumphs being a little bit more of that beloved imagery of the desert racing and the on-road, off-road before they got lighter and smaller, and you had the Huskies and you had the Honda Elsinore that came in the 70s. But I think it goes back further than that. I think, and we saw this recently with Harley Davidson's ad campaigns around the Pan America, right? Where Harley Davidson is like, we've been building adventure bikes since the dawn of time. and we're just going to ignore the whole 80-year period in the middle where our bikes were not designated to go on-road or off-road.
Unless you're Patrick Garvin.
Well,
Yes.
yes. Unless you're pulling a Patrick Garvin, 100%. But I think for me, when you look at the history of motorcycles were originated at a time when we didn't have roads, right? Like we had dirt.
We didn't have paved roads.
We didn't have paved roads.
Right.
We had dirt paths. We had dirt roads. We had, roads that oftentimes, were covered in all kinds of obstacles expelled from horses and cows and livestock that we had to get through and around. When it ever rained, it got muddy. When it was dry, it was dusty. So I think for me, the motorcycles all were originally designed to be dual purpose motorcycles or dual sport motorcycles. And then there was a shift of that as you got into the 30s through the 50s. And then by the time the 70s rolled around, and that DT1 behind Spenser is a 69 model. So 1969 introduced the 1970s. And by that point, Eisenhower had introduced the, interstate highway system. We had a network of paved roads. Dirt roads were really becoming a thing of the past that you kind of had to search out. So I don't know. Are not all motorcycles dual sport motorcycles in their origins?
No, disagree. I don't know if that gets me another Zach Quartz bingo punch card, but disagree, Spurgeon.
I don't think Zach would have disagreed so adamantly. So I think you're actually going above and beyond Zach
Perfect.
with that.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's what we're aiming for. Okay, I disagree because I think it is important to as Patrick is sort of hinting at, look at how the terminology has changed over time. And the reality is the term dual sport didn't exist probably until the 80s. I don't know if there's a specific person that's been anointed inventor of the dual sport phrase, but I guess in that time period that you're talking about, the triumph time period of the sort of desert racers, they were enduros, right? No one was saying, "Hey, I'm going to take my dual sport out this weekend." They were essentially street bikes that had gotten gradually a little bit more off-road oriented as people started using them for competition. I don't think, and this gets into personal definition a little bit, but I don't think it can be considered a dual sport until we get to the period where the sports have actually diverged. You have motocross bikes and you have street bikes. And then someone said, well, what if there is a machine that could kind of do both of those quote unquote sports? And so in my mind, that's where, the DT1 is kind of an interesting example, but it's still, it's not like it was based on a motocrosser really. It's kind of got a street bike frame. I think Suzuki had like the DR125, maybe it was their first quote unquote dual sport, and they literally took a 125 motocross bike essentially and then put a plate on it and said, look, you can now ride it to the trails or to the track and have all of that in one. And then certainly BMW kind of blew up that segment in terms of what we know it as today when they had the GS come out in whatever it was, 81, because the GS literally means road and dirt or terrain and street. So I think to me the term dual sport doesn't really come into vogue until the 80s. So calling anything before the 1980s a dual sport is revisionist in a way that I don't think is entirely accurate, even though you are technically correct in saying people rode them in a variety of environments.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to bring up a Harley WLA in the World Wars, but you just ruined my entire argument, Spencer.
Oh, geez.
Well, make your argument. Put him down.
No,
Put a fork in him.
I think you made a really great point with the Harley stuff, and it got me thinking. Like, yeah, I mean, like the WLA, that was I don't know about sport, but it was definitely on off road. It had to be, in a wartime environment. But going back to labels and that, like, it seems like dual sports weren't a thing until somebody in a OEM marketing room was like, "We're gonna market this dual sport motorcycle." So like how many of these terms are marketing fodder, so to speak?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like what's a scrambler?
Yeah.
What's a scrambler? What is an enduro? What is an adventure bike?
Yeah.
I think we're gonna get into that a little bit more. But maybe to go back to what Spurgeon very prematurely jumped into at the beginning. What about we go through each of our personal definitions for today.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So I didn't really think about it that way. Like, I do think that you're both onto something in the fact that prior to some of these marketing definitions, really what people did, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, was they took whatever motorcycle they had and they went out and they did whatever they wanted to do. So, if they wanted to go board track racing, they took their Harley Davidson or their Indian and they outfitted it and modified it for board track racing. Or if they wanted to go race in the forest, they outfitted it the best they could. And even those, I talked about this previously, but there was an article that I wrote about like the best scramblers of the 1960s or something like that. And it was from a Popular Science magazine from the 1960s that I found. And even the bikes that were the Triumphs of the day or the BSAs of the day, they were still heavily modified. People bought, a TR6 and they modified it to be better for off-road use. So it wasn't like the OEMs were coming out and saying, hey, this is a bike that you can use for off-road competition or for on-road riding. And to Spenser, to your point, like those specialty motorcycles that were designed for competition, I mean, there's almost an episode there too, and that's, what Zach would say about like the sports side of things. And like when were bikes designed only for on-road racing competition versus people just taking on-road or taking motorcycles and modifying them to be better for on-road. So I think that's an important designation, and I will say that you have convinced me. When we're talking about dual sport motorcycles, we should probably think about that in the realm of when the term was actually, originated. So I'll shut up now, and I will say that, for us at High Side Low Side, we'll let Patrick go first with, and you kind of already gave us this, but like just your personal definition of what a dual sport is.
In the year 2022, right now, right here, what is a dual sport for you?
Well, I'm probably the guy with the most like liberal definition of a dual sport. I'll probably stick with that. Like I said, it's just something that's like legal on road that can be ridden off road. That opens up a huge can of worms that I've really taken advantage of. I've like a lot of other kooks out there taking Sportsters and taking them off road, and I've raced the Built 100 on an FTR. But there's also guys like Round the World, I think it was Round the World Doug, that did the Trans-America Trail on an Evo bagger with a sidecar. He put ATV winches on the front and back of the sidecar, and he did it on an Evo bagger. And so, like, is that a dual sport? I mean, like, it kind of is, but it's also a bagger. So I'm going to stick with my super wide open definition of just a street legal bike that can be ridden off-road. And there are plenty that probably shouldn't be ridden off-road, and there's a lot of people like myself that once you start doing that, taking these bikes that are probably not meant to be off-road, and then you do get on like let's consider what like is the true modern definition of a dual sport, and you ride those, then you're like, your eyes are open to like not doing that anymore. But it's just I think it's a street legal motorcycle you can take off-road.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that that's the perspective that you take for the definition, because I think I come at it from the opposite direction, which is not really disagreeing with you, but it's just inverse, where to me the current modern definition of a dual sport is an off-road motorcycle that you can legally take on-road. So I guess when I think of a dual sport, I think it is first and foremost, it's essentially a dirt bike, and it is a dirt bike that they have made street legal by adding a license plate bracket and a headlight and blinkers and a mirror. And to me, that's where it diverges a little bit from, say, an adventure bike, because an adventure bike, in my mind, you're starting a little bit more with a street platform and making it dirt worthy. So yeah, for me, dirt bike that you can legally ride on the street, that is a dual sport. Spurgeon?
So I think that all bikes that are designed in any way to go on-road and off-road are dual sport motorcycles, and then there's varying shades within that category. So for me, I know that this conversation was born out of, people getting upset that adventure bikes aren't dual sport motorcycles. And I saw this recently in an article that I wrote about how to get into adventure riding, and people are just very upset about taking big bikes off-road, which confuses me. Like, if you don't want to do it, don't do it, but don't knock the people that are enjoying themselves doing it. But in my mind, like, a dual sport motorcycle is any bike that you can go on-road or off-road with, and that is a BMW R1250 GS. That's a dual sport motorcycle, or it is a Kawasaki KLX 230L. that is a dual sport motorcycle, and everything in between those two. What I do want to say, before the two of you jump in and disagree with me, and then we all start the fights that the high side, low side audience loves, because the high side, low side audience does love when we disagree. I have got a message here from our producer, Chase, and he has been fact-finding us, as he often does while we're podcasting. And I want to let you know that according to Wikipedia, again,
my old friend,
Chase has let us know that Suzuki introduced the DR350 in 1990 and promoted it as a dual sport or dirt bike with a license plate. The term dual sport and dually were quickly adopted by riders as well as the motorcycle press. So it does seem that as we're having this conversation around the definition of dual sport, that perhaps it was our good friends over at Suzuki who coined the term in 1990.
Nice. Suzuki needs a win, so let's give him that.
Yeah,
And
they don't have
I-
electric starters on their dirt bikes, but they did come up with the dual sport.
Look at him go. And that's why they just never stopped making whatever they started making in 1990. They're like, well, this is this is all we got. Let's just keep running with it. And I think they had DRs before that. I do think the first street legal DR they had was maybe in the early 80s. I think it was like 82 was the DR125. But it is I am curious, maybe it wasn't until 1990 that they formalized the term dual sport into the marketing category that it is now.
Yeah.
So we've got everyone's definitions.
Well, I think it's important to note that, like, even amongst the three of us, I wouldn't say any of our definitions are the same, right? Like, so we are three colleagues that are in the motorcycle industry, and the three of us, we could probably sit here and do the whole like hung jury debate and try to convince each other to adopt our definitions, but until one of us needs food or a bathroom break, we'd probably just keep going around in a circle. So I do think it's important for those of you listening is the fact that, like, even as we're having this discussion, I don't think Patrick and Spenser and I fully agree on what we define as a dual sport motorcycle. Would we say that's correct, gentlemen?
Yeah, I have an example I want to run by you guys.
Okay, go for it. I love examples.
Does this fit into the category of dual sport? Is a supermoto a dual sport?
I was going to bring I'm so glad you brought this up because I've
Patrick,
recently
this is right
owned
up
a
your alley.
supermoto and I loved it. And I kind of don't think it does because what spurred my purchase of 890 Adventure was my supermoto and the fact that it just wasn't capable enough off-road.
Interesting.
And so,
and you rode your supermoto off-road a lot. Like it wasn't just
a lot. Way more than I should have.
Pavement princess.
Yeah, no, it spent a lot. I would say 40% of its time it spent in the dirt, and it just wasn't good enough in the dirt. So I'm not sure. I think it kind of like sits on the brink of being a dual sport. But interestingly enough, as you were talking about your definition, and I was thinking about how broad mine was. If you just said the words dual sport to me, what pops in my head is probably Spenser's definition. It's a dirt bike with a headlight and a taillight and a plate. As I was defining it bigger, I mean, I think I'm standing by my super wide definition.
Yeah. Don't back off.
No, I'm going down with the ship. But when you say dual sport, that's the image I get is the dirt bike. But I don't think a supermoto is a dual sport really. I think it's a street legal bike. It's a street bike.
And which model did you have, Patrick?
I had a KTM 690 SMCR.
Okay.
Which would be a bigger supermoto, not like a true 450 supermoto.
Yeah, not like it wasn't like you had like a dirt bike that you modded with 17-inch wheels. It's an interesting question, right? Because by my definition, any bike that's designed to go on-road or off-road is technically a dual sport. However, I also do not think of a supermoto as a dual sport motorcycle, and I think mainly because of the tire size selection. Like when I hear 17-inch tires, I don't think of dual sport. Dual sport I think are on the adventure side 19 or 21-inch fronts. On the dirt side, definitely 21-inch fronts. So, that's a great question.
But isn't that fascinating? Because a supermoto is on the exact same platform essentially as a 701 Enduro, which in my mind is kind of a quintessential dual sport. And B, a supermoto is designed very fundamentally to do two sports, to go on a little, kart track or something where you're on pavement and you're in the dirt. It's like, it's so purpose built for that thing. But I don't disagree with you guys. In my mind, if someone says dual sport, I do not think of a supermoto at all, even though it does oddly kind of fit technically within that definition. So
I was just take a quick break here. If our audience doesn't know what we're talking about, we'll get our editor and producer to help source some images for the screen here. But really, what we're talking about by a very loose definition, a supermoto is a bike that has kind of a dirt bike chassis, but with 17-inch wheels. So it's designed to be able to race on the track, but then there's typically off-road sections as well. So if you're racing a supermoto, oftentimes you're racing on tight track conditions with then a dirt segment of the course. But I would say it's probably designed for the off-road portion of the race is probably a little bit more flat track style. It's not like muddy, it's more like groomed hard pack.
But I mean,
right?
yeah, there are jumps though, and I mean, Patrick, from what I have heard and have seen, you kind of enduroed your supermoto, right? Like you took it on trails.
Oh, 100%. I think on the track, though, if you look at the supermoto race tracks, the dirt section is normally much, much smaller than the paved section.
Yeah.
The other thing I would throw out there is from my experience, supermoto suspension is not nearly as plush off-road as dirt bike suspension, which was one of my, before I bought the 890, I was really considering doing kind of this weirdo overhaul to my supermoto and keeping the 17s, but putting like more of a dirt oriented 17-inch tire on it. But I ended up talking myself out of it in a lot of ways, just because of the money I would have had to spend on the suspension. And then I don't think, even though you throw a dirt tire on a 17-inch wheel, to Spurgeon's, where he was kind of going with his point, it does not work very well at all, like compared to a 21. Like you end up slamming into rocks and things instead of rolling over the top of them.
And that gets back to, so again, my definition of like any bike that can go on and off road is technically a dual sport. It's dual in its functionality. But then I think about the original Multistrada, right? And the original Multistrada, which is multiple roads, is the definition of that, right? Like, correct me if I'm wrong, Spenser or Patrick, but like Multistrada is multiple roads, right?
Sure,
like
that seems like that would make sense. I don't think any of us speak Italian, but that seems to
like
check out.
That's what Ducati was going for, right? So like, but I remember one of the very early adventure events that I went to, an individual showed up on that first generation, or maybe it was like a second gen Multistrada, and they had TKC80s, because TKC80 is one of the few tires where they make a big block knobby and a 17-inch rim. And they were on the struggle bus because that 17-inch tire is just really a bear to ride off-road. And then, what about a Versi 650? A Versi 650 is a tire that it's 17-inch wheels. It's kind of a supermoto. It's kind of an adventure bike. It's somewhere in between.
It's kind of perfect. Yeah, you're right. That's a really good point.
But is it a dual sport? Mr. Perfection here.
So I think this is where it gets a little bit granular and difficult for people to wrap their heads around. And I think this is a good time to mention that if you're the sort of person that gets bent out of shape and super pedantic about dual sport definitions, then just take a breath. It's not that big of a deal.
Go ride your motorcycle.
Yeah, just go ride your motorcycle. We're not curing cancer here. We're just talking about bikes. And so if someone comes up and whatever, they have a Versus 650 and it's got knobby tires and they're like, oh yeah, I really like my dual sport. And you're like, well, technically, I listened to a podcast and they said that it's only a dirt bike that has street, like, stop. It doesn't matter. I think if people want to call their motorcycle a dual sport because they ride it in multiple environments, then great. I think dual sport, the same as adventure bike, is as much a state of being or a mindset as a technical definition. So we can get in the weeds about, is a supermoto or is this other bike technically a dual sport? But I just, as a general piece of advice to the motorcycling population out there, I just want to say, take a breath. It's okay. It's going to be fine if someone calls it a dual sport and it doesn't align with your personal definition.
But that gets back to the whole reason, that we're having this, is that like there's so often times people that are getting so worked up over this, and I think it's a fun game to play. As long at the end of the day is like, as long as at the end of the day, you as the listener or you two as my co-hosts on this, just recognize that like, none of this matters. Like,
Oh, man.
like everything can be a dual sport if you want it to be, and people will then turn around and say that's absolutely not true. And there's no way that we're going to win this argument, but it is a fun argument to have, because even as we're doing this, like, I wasn't expecting to have Spenser throw out, Supermoto, and like that's a great question. And then you get into, is a multistrada a dual sport, or is a Versys a dual sport? Because these are bikes that technically have some element, whether it's longer travel suspension or some of the features on the bike itself, to be used in multi-terrain situations. And it goes back to my original argument of like, it's all different flavors, man. Like you could have a dual sport that's flavored more to street use, and Patrick converting a 690 Supermoto over to off-road use would have required a lot of effort. And there's probably a better bike if you are preferring a flavor that is more off-road oriented. So it really comes down to like, how much time are you spending on the road? How much time are you spending off-road? And I think one of the things that, one of the questions we had here is like, what isn't a dual sport motorcycle? I think it really comes down to personal use. Well, Patrick made the argument earlier about somebody taking, a Harley Davidson with a sidecar off-road. Is that not a dual sport motorcycle? Like, would you tell that person that they don't have a dual sport motorcycle?
Yeah, I think it comes down to like just what you want to personally endure with your motorcycle. And I love that people get so fired up about definitions. I mean, kind of in my kind of core world, in like V-twin world, this is the same conversation we have about what is a chopper. But in the dirt world, we're having it about a dual sport, that people get so attached to a certain definition. I'm not sure you can, like, and that's the great part about it, right? Is maybe you can't put it in a box. But I think, I took, our dirt Sportster to Mojave for Get On ADV Fest, and, definitely didn't have nearly as good a time if I would have been on a true dual sport. So I think part of it is like, what are you personally willing to like give up functionality in your motorcycle? So like, yes, I could take a Dyna and I could, rip it through the hills here. It would be a terrible, terrible experience. But it would end up in broken parts, and I'd make it work. We'd get there. You know what I mean? But
and you would end up in broken parts? Yeah,
probably. I would lawn dart myself somewhere for sure. I mean, I do that on good bikes, but man, I have a bad bike. But I mean, but is that like what you want your motorcycle to be? I mean, for me, especially since living out here since 2018, like I want my motorcycles, and I think that's pretty apparent. I want my motorcycles to be dirt bikes. You know what I mean? Like my garage went from Harleys and choppers to like literally everything has knobby tires on it. I think I own Spenser's definition of a dual sport. I own a 08 KLX 450R. And since 2018, I've put, now almost 20,000 miles on it. So I have a Sportster that I could have done that with, but I eventually figured out that like, it's much better to actually ride a dual sport than to take the street bike that I had and keep shoving it, force feeding it dual sport.
So let me ask you a question. So you recently purchased a KTM 890 Adventure R because you wanted to presumably do, more off-road riding than your 690 Supermoto was allowing. Do you not consider your 890R a dual sport based on how you're using it?
I do. I would consider it a long-range dual sport.
A new term.
Yeah.
Long-range dual sport.
AKA an adventure bike, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And I think we're gonna get into that whole like what is the difference between an adventure bike and a dual sport a little bit. I am curious because we had this written down, and I have to follow the questions that we have on the paper so that I get invited back. Is there anything that you...
Hang on, I got to make a little notch here. Zach Quartz imitation and job / for keeping the podcast on track.
Oh, it's going very well so far.
You've earned another one.
Is there anything that you specifically would say is not a dual sport? That just like straight up and I get we can go round and around about how well you can ride anything as a dual
Right.
sport. I think there's a difference between a bike that is a dual sport and a person that is willing to ride a machine as a dual sport. And that's where probably some
Right.
of the confusion comes in, is because dual sporting can be a lifestyle, and you can, to quote Meet the Parents, you can milk anything with nipples. But I do think it's fair to say that there are some motorcycles that just kind of very simply do not count as a dual sport. And I want to hear if you guys have any hot takes on that.
I just want the audience to know that we had a bet a couple days ago when we were going through the pre-production for this podcast as to whether or not Spenser could organically work in the word nipples into this conversation. And I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming, and you nailed it. So Spenser just won $5 and a free high side, low side t-shirt for those of you listening.
It's a good day for Spenser.
I do think that, like, when I think about most recently, right, I saw a video on Instagram about an individual who had put TKC80s on an R6 and was ripping an R6 in some pretty gnarly off-road terrain. An R6 is not a dual sport, right? Like, you can do that, and it's going to be miserable because an R6 has 4 inches of suspension travel that's designed for high-performance on-road use. Like, that's not a dual sport motorcycle. It looks wacky and fun, and it gets a lot of views because somebody wants to watch someone else torment themselves. I enjoyed watching Patrick Garvin show up on a dual sport Sportster at Get On Adventure Fest in Mojave, and when he asked me if I wanted to ride it, I chuckled and said no, because it was beating the hell out of him, and I was on a Tiger 900 Rally with almost 9 inches of suspension travel. So I was having a good time. I didn't need to do that to myself. So I think when you're thinking about makes and models of motorcycles, a cruiser is not a dual sport. It weighs 700 pounds. A Goldwing is not a dual sport. A sport bike, a sport touring motorcycle, these are not dual sports. When I think of what a dual sport is, it is an adventure bike or a dirt bike with a license plate.
It's purpose-built.
It's purpose-built. Would anyone disagree?
No, I would agree with that.
Patrick, probably you the most, because you're the one that's using most of these bikes in those situations. Or Spenser, for the things that you've made Ari and Zach do with motorcycles off-road. You might disagree.
I would agree with you. And I pulled in an outlier, and the guy that took the bagger across country, and I would still agree with you because I seen the same clip as you did with the dude in the R6. And my first thought was he went about 10 foot past that camera and then didn't do that again. You know what I mean? It didn't it wasn't like he was out ripping trails, for 6 hours on his R6. So I would agree with you. And, I'm probably the poster child for, doing something just because you can, not because you should. But yeah, I would agree with you that I think it's, without making a wacky, 1% argument. Yeah. Cruisers, touring bikes, sport bikes are pretty easily, determined as not a dual sport.
Yeah. Spenser?
Look at us coming together, kumbaya around the dual sport fire. We've really come a long way.
Well, it's interesting because Patrick, you talked about doing wacky things. I remember when I took, we had gotten my buddy Abby and I for an article and a video. We took a Ural with his sidecar, and Ural at the time had I think it was the desert model or something, and they had slightly knobbier tires on it, and they were advertising it as you can go down a dirt road. So we're okay, cool, let's do the LA B2V dual sport ride with this. And LA B2V, for those of you that don't know, it was originally a race 30, 40 years ago that folks raced from Los Angeles out to Barstow, and then from Barstow to Vegas. It's subsequently become a very fun dual sport ride. But you basically ride off-road from north of Los Angeles to Barstow. You sleep for the night, you wake up, and then you ride off-road again across the desert until you get to Las Vegas. And it was miserable on a Ural. We had parts falling off. There's a picture of me in the article trying to put an exhaust muffler back on because we lost a muffler. It was not a comfortable ride. Where the Ural shined was riding around Santa Monica Boulevard with Abby and I, having a good time in the 70-degree sunshine, goofing off for passerbys. But it wasn't something that was necessarily ideal for use off-road. So I would say that a Ural is not a dual sport motorcycle, and I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, it seems like the biggest takeaway again is that, so there is technically a definition for what a dual sport is. And then people have their own personal definitions. And there is an understanding that you can ride anything as a dual sport if you are willing to endure various degrees of discomfort or torture or however you want to describe it. However, I think there just needs to be an understanding that in those exceptions, whether it's your cruiser with knobbies or your sport bike with knobbies, just because you put knobbies on it does not make it a dual sport. You are just riding it like a dual sport. You are riding it in imitation of the actual thing that sort of defines that category. Does that seem fair?
I would agree with you.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think another way to look at this is like if there was a new rider and is like, recommend a dual sport to me.
Yep.
I'm not going to be like, hey, buy a Sportster.
Step one.
And some TKC 80s.
I got an R6 in my garage with your name on it, Junior.
Fuse your spine, and then no, stay with me.
Yeah. Hear me out.
I think that's a great point, right? Like, if any one of our listeners wrote in, and said, hey, recommend your top 3 favorite dual sports, that I could get into or I could consider. I'm thinking about getting a dual sport. A Goldwing would not be on the list, nor would a large cruiser or a sport bike. So I think that's a great way of looking at it. And this is probably a great transition to remind you that as you're listening along, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns for the 3 of us, as always, shoot an email over to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your concerns. We want to hear just your musings about motorcycles. Whether you agree or disagree, send it our way. And we will be right back with more of this tantalizing conversation. But we do need to get in a word from our sponsor, Motul, who makes all of these shenanigans possible. And we are back for more of the episode. The next question we had on our list were, what are some of the limitations of a dual sport? So we talked about if you grab an R6 and you put knobby tires on it, there's going to be limitations there. If you take a Sportster and you beat the hell out of yourself in the Black Hills of South Dakota, you're going to have limitations. What are the limitations of a dual sport motorcycle?
So speaking from personal experience, like I said, the bike I've probably ridden the most in the past 4 or 5 years is my dual sport, my 450. And one of the things that spurred me into the 890 was range. I referred to it earlier as a long range enduro bike, but like being able to even get to the other side of the Black Hills, you can stop and get gas, but there's still you could run out somewhere. I couldn't get out of the Black Hills with it. So to me, it was range. Mm-hmm. That was my issue with the dual sport as far as, why it's not an adventure bike.
I don't want to say I disagree with that. I don't want to disagree more than once in this episode and really get a reputation. But I guess to me, range seems kind of solvable without diverging too far out of the dual sport realm. For example, I think of the classic XR650 or XR600 desert racers that are very much dual sports, and they have 5 or 6 gallon tanks.
8-gallon tanks of fuel.
8-gallon tanks, yeah. And to me, when I look at that bike with a big desert tank and it has a license plate and it has a headlight, and in my mind I'm thinking, yeah, that is, if anything, that's peak dual sport. You are capital D dual sport right now. On the flip side, I think the biggest limitation for my own definition of a dual sport is comfort. That you can add some range, but once you start adding comfort, and I think comfort can mean both creature comforts, like can you bring any luggage or support, and
cruise
also,
control.
Yeah, cruise control, physical comfort. Are you getting blasted with wind or rain or whatever it might be? And I think for most dual sports, that's going to be a limitation. It really is, to go back to my idea of it's a dirt bike that's been made street legal. Dirt bikes are not famous for their comfort or easygoing nature, so they're going to beat you up a little bit.
And I think, again, this gets back to my shades of gray comment where, like, as soon as you take a dual sport and add a 7-gallon desert tank to it, it's not going to handle as well in tight, slick off-road conditions. And as soon as you take a dual sport and add a plush seat or, a throttle lock or a bunch of Farkles, it's not going to hold up as well in an off-road situation. And ultimately, I think of one of the bigger limitations, and maybe this has to do with comfort, but it's like on-road usability. Like a true dual sport, and the way the two of you are defining them as, dirt bikes that can go on the road, they're kind of miserable on the road. Oftentimes, I have people come to me and say, "Hey, you own a KTM 350 EXCF. Like, I'm thinking about getting one of those to just use as a commuter around town." And I'm like, "Don't do it. It's one of the most uncomfortable, miserable bikes I have ever ridden on the street. Like, hands down, like not a great bike for street riding." And that's because, unlike other manufacturers, and again, this is at Shades, and I think it's important for our audience to understand this. If you're looking at a Honda CRF 450L, and you're looking at a KTM 350 EXCF, and I know that one's a 450, one's a 350. Imagine they're the same displacement in your mind for a second. The Honda can comfortably, and I'm using air quotes as I say that, but like can more comfortably cruise down the highway. It's got, a polyurethane filled swing arm. It's got anti-vibration damping in the cases. Honda tried to make that bike more streetable. Whereas like you hop on the 350 and by comparison, it's like riding a chainsaw. Like it's not nearly as refined. So my point in saying that is oftentimes I think some of the limitations of a dual sport are like, how far do you want to actually ride it on the road versus just, doing what you have to do to get to the trails and to really ride it. And part of that goes into how you've modified it, which is, I think, the point that the two of you were making as well.
So here's an example of a couple bikes for you guys. And I think this may segue into our next question quite nicely. Our next question is basically, what is the difference between a dual sport and an adventure bike, which I think we're scratching the surface of that right now. But you mentioned the CRF 450, the Honda's Dual Sport 450, but let's drop that down a level and go to the CRF 300, so the CRF 300L and the CRF 300L Rally, because I think when you say dual sport, the CRF 300L, that's smack dab in dual sport territory. CRF 300L Rally, it's more plush, it has a windscreen, it has more fuel capacity. Is that still a dual sport, or is the CRF 300L Rally an adventure bike?
I think it's still a dual sport. I don't think it is. I don't think it's an adventure bike. And for me, like I said, I own both, and I've honestly had a little bit of a steep learning curve riding the 890 off road, and I've planted myself on the ground twice in the last month in pretty spectacular fashion.
Congratulations.
Yeah, riding my 890 like it is a 450. It's not the same thing. So I think the ability to, taking everybody's riding ability, there's some guys, the Chris Birches of the world will prove me wrong, but riding the 300 fast in the dirt is going to be easier than riding, a 890 fast in the dirt. That's where
that's high praise for the 300. If you want to go fast off road, you put that 890 away.
I said it would be easier. I didn't say be faster.
I disagree. I disagree with that only because I've spent time on the 300, and the 300 is such a lethargic. I don't want to say a lethargic turd.
But it's so sweet.
It's sweet. No, it's sweet, right?
It's sweet. It's the sweetest little puppy dog.
I watched you dump one, Spenser, Robert.
Dump? You mean I was like hacked out? What were we doing? 70, 75 miles an hour through the desert?
You were getting a little bit too aggressive with that thing, and you forgot that the brakes don't work too well. So just so everyone listening can understand what we're talking about, Spenser made a point about the 300L. I think it's important to note that if you're looking at these bikes, even within Honda's lineup, it's hard to understand. So a CRF 300L or a CRF 300 Rally, it's not nearly the same performance as something like a CRF 450L. It's like night and day different. Yeah. And I don't know how to describe this other than like the CRF 300L has no power. It has a suspension that you will bottom out just sitting on it. It's a beloved little motorcycle, but it's not performance oriented. It is something that is more about puttering down a trail. And realistically, you're probably using that bike mostly on the street because it doesn't vibrate as badly. It's a little bit better tuned. Like, it's something that I would guess if you were asking me, I just want a bike that looks like a dual sport, but I really just want something great on fuel that I can commute around the city, and it absorbs potholes really well, and like it's a fun light bike to keep in the city. a CRF 300L would be great for that. If you wanted to go fast down a dirt road, I probably would have other recommendations.
Well, and that's, I think, to be fair, that's coming at it from I think it is a great beginner dual sport. Like if you're just getting into off-road riding and you don't want to commit so fully that you get a motorcycle that doesn't even have a license plate and you have to put it in your truck and, haul it to the nearest trails. I think the 300L or the 300L Rally are great picks. I've spent a lot of time on that bike, and it's not fast, but it is, to me, a pretty quintessential dual sport. And Patrick, I want to say I baited you a little bit with that because I agree with you. I don't think the CRF 300L Rally is an adventure bike.
Right.
I think it's interesting how Honda is trying to sort of push that boundary a little bit. To me, I can't think of another dirt bike offhand, another dual sport offhand that sort of pushes the boundary up to the edge of adventure bike, maybe as much as that one does. But the fundamental difference in my mind is that an adventure bike needs to start with a street platform. And you start with a street platform and you make it capable of going off-road, as opposed to my original definition for dual sport, which is you're starting with a dirt platform and you're making it able to go on-road. So that's the easiest way for me to sort of extrapolate those definitions into the motorcycles that I see out and about at an adventure rally.
So you don't think, so when you say you can't think of another bike that's pushing the boundary like the CRF 300R Rally, what about a Versys 300X?
No, because the reason I say that is that the 300X is not starting as a dirt bike. Therefore, to me, it is not a true dual sport. And I wouldn't I would not get bent out of shape if someone called their Versys 300X a dual sport. I'm just saying if I'm adhering to that idea that a dual sport starts as a dirt bike and is made to be more street oriented, Honda really made a big effort to take that dirt bike and make it as comfortable as it could while still obviously being a dirt bike. Most manufacturers don't do that. They say, well, if we're going to make it comfortable, we'll just start with our street platform and give it a little bit of off-road.
So your definition there, and so just so the audience understands, this CRF 300L and CRF 300L Rally is a single-cylinder engine that is a little bit more dirt-oriented, whereas the engine in the 300X from Kawasaki, the Versys 300X, is a parallel twin that originated from their Ninja lineup.
Yeah, and it's a street chassis. Like the frame, the engine, everything about the Versys 300 obviously comes from Kawasaki's street line of motorcycles. They just sort of stretched it out, made it a little bit more aggressive, so that if you want to take it down a dirt road.
Is their chassis really street oriented for that bike? It's been a long time since I've ridden one, but I thought it was more of like a specifically designed chassis.
I guess the point is it is not the same chassis as in the KX. What is it? The KX 300?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Like it is not a dirt bike chassis. Very clearly that they have just tried to streetify.
Streetify.
Yeah. You heard it here first. So maybe, they compromised a little bit and they said, oh, we're going to take this chassis and we're going to make it, sort of adventure capable. But to me, that still says we're designing a chassis, and that's from frame to subframe to suspension to riding position, that is essentially made for the street, even though we might reinforce it to go off-road. And KTM does the same thing, right? It's not to say that KTMs are not super off-road capable, but they're adventure bikes.
Who would ever say that? Why would you even bring that up on this podcast? Who are you?
How dare you?
You just took a point off.
Yeah.
I think there's a bike that blurs the line for me better than anything, and enduro is actually in the name, but the 690 and 701s. You can get 180 miles out of a tank on those things. You can KTM makes heated grips for them. You can throw a big giant loop bag on it. You can actually put
Patrick is talking about a KTM 690 Enduro R, which is a single cylinder 690, and then they have a Husky version of that, which they call 701. Essentially the same engine. The biggest reason that bike can do 180 miles and be comfortable is in the most recent redesign, there's now, I think, dual counterbalancers. So typically if you had a giant single cylinder 690cc motorcycle, it would vibrate you to death.
Yeah.
But they've managed to balance that out. So I think that just so the audience understands what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. I love that one.
Yeah, it's 70, 75 horsepower. It weighs about 350 full of fuel. good range. Like I said, you can get heated grips for it. I don't think there's a cruise option for it, but people have ridden those bikes around the world. I mean, it's really on the line of enduro and ADV bike.
Especially they have the 701 LR, right? The long range 701 Husky that has, I think, a 6-gallon tank from the factory. This isn't some, faded plastic Farkle that your uncle put on his bike. This is Husqvarna has designed it to be used for exactly this. And it's the engine, to the point of it being, is it street oriented? It's an engine that they use in the Vitpillen and the Svartpillen. It is kind of a street engine. It's kind of a dirt engine. It looks like a dirt bike, but I think that's a perfect example of, say specifically a 701 LR, so the long range 701 with luggage, and you added cruise control. Is that a dual sport or is that an adventure bike?
We're getting ahead of ourselves here. So really, I mean, because now we're arguing, whether or not this is a dual sport or an adventure bike. Well, what is an adventure bike? What's the difference between a dual sport and an adventure bike? So if we're now going to pivot into adventure bikes, what takes it from being a dual sport and pushes it into an adventure bike? Before we get into like which bikes we think
Spurgeon.
split the line the best.
Yeah,
Which one is it?
I defined this. I think I defined it probably so perfectly that it went right by you and you didn't even think we had to address it.
Versus 650.
No, well, yes, but also no. The definition, and give me feedback if you guys don't agree with this. But I think the definition of an adventure bike versus dual sport is: dual sport, start as dirt bike, make it street legal. Adventure bike, start as a street bike, make it dirt oriented. That's my very quick distillation of the difference.
So what does that mean for the listener? Like in your mind, like what's something that started as a street bike that has been made off-road capable? Like what splits that line for the two of you?
I mean, I think for a simple example is, take KTM's line, it's like the 1290 Adventure. There's a 1290 Super Duke that is clearly a street bike. There's no one's like, oh, a Super Duke, is that an adventure bike? Or it's obviously a hyper naked street oriented machine. So take that engine, that general platform, but your KTM, you have all this off-road heritage. Let's slap it into an overall package that can really bomb down some dirt roads. So I think that both, when you look at the weight, the size, the comfort, all of those things are going to have a street-oriented vibe to them. But the suspension, the tire choice, some of the electronics, all of that can make it able to go off-road. So I think there's a number of examples of manufacturers that do that. But I guess to a certain degree, it feels like you kind of know it when you see it in terms of adventure bike versus dual sport.
So you hear that, audience, when you see it. That would be a great way to do a podcast. Well, an adventure bike, it when you see it. And let's move on to the next question.
I should have said, when you have impeccable instincts like I have, you just know it when you see it. For the rest of you, I have no idea. It's probably impossible.
Patrick, anything you want to add there to Spencer's crystal clear definition?
I think, I mean, he actually, alluded to this earlier. I think it maybe more than range is comfort, right? I mean, that's where the ADV bikes kind of shine, is, the electronic suites, and, I mean, even with Harley, right? Like it drops down 1.5 inches. You're not going to get that on an enduro. You're not going to get, the rally mode that we have on the 890 Adventures, and, 9 different levels of traction control and ride, all the hot rod stuff. It's more of a stripped down feel on an enduro bike. So maybe comfort is the line where once you cross it, it's an ADV bike.
Well, let me ask you this, and I think this is an interesting question, because oftentimes adventure bikes get touted for their comfort. Obviously, it seems like you could say that an adventure bike is a more comfortable, bigger dual sport, but is an adventure bike more comfortable than just a pure street bike?
I think I've said it before. I think I even wrote maybe an article and alluded to this, is that I think adventure bikes, if you never put them in the dirt, are better baggers than like quote unquote Harley baggers. I mean, if you have GV hard luggage on an adventure bike, you have the 2 side bags and you have the tour pack, it is so much more functional than a Challenger or an Ultra Classic, or you can fit way more stuff in there and easier. You don't worry about scratching it. The bags come off way easy. Even if you're just staying in hotels, a set of GV luggage just snaps right off. And where a Harley bag is, it's awkward. It doesn't stand up. You can't set it on the ground by itself. And adventure bikes have, cruise control. And I mean, short of a radio, they have all of the creature comforts of a touring bike. So yes, I think if I was never going to put an adventure bike in the dirt and I wanted a touring bike, I would probably still buy a version of an adventure bike.
Spenser?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, your question was pretty broad. Is an adventure bike more comfortable or better than a street bike? And obviously, street bike is about as widely as we can define that category of motorcycle. So is an adventure bike a better option for touring cross country than a Honda Grom? Yes, probably. And is it I'm being a little bit snarky there. Is it better than probably 90 to 95% of other motorcycles? Yes, I also agree with that. I do think there's a time and a place for touring specific motorcycles, whether that's a Goldwing, which I have a very soft spot for the Goldwing, or a K1600 GTL. I think those bikes offer a degree of approachability and refinement that, especially for a passenger, is going to be more appealing than most adventure bikes. If you throw a top box on the back of your bikes and you put a passenger there, yeah, they have a backrest. Yeah, it's better than most bikes they're going to ride. But then have them sit on the back of a Goldwing and ask them which one they'd prefer, and I'd be shocked if they didn't say, well, yeah, this one has heated seats and there's speakers and I've got like these arms wrapping around me. It's clearly designed to be the ultimate touring bike. But I do think people underestimate how exceptional adventure bikes can be just as daily riders, as touring bikes. Maybe they don't underestimate it. Maybe that's why adventure bikes are so unbelievably popular right now, and why people call them the SUVs of the motorcycling world. Because yeah, you can make fun of people for being like, oh, you only take it to Starbucks, but the truth is they're just good motorcycles, and they're comfortable and they're fun and they can have lots of power. And if you do get a wild hair on the weekend to go down a dirt road, that's still an option, which unless you're a real glutton for punishment, you're probably not going to do on your $30,000 Goldwing.
Well, I think it's interesting. So I agree with everything. The two of you have made some great points, and I think that oftentimes, when we think about comfort for adventure bikes, that is kind of the biggest differentiator between adventure bikes and a dual sport. I think suspension and wheel size are oftentimes what you can tell. If you look at a bike and you're like, cool, that's got big wheels on it, it's got a 21-inch front, and it's got an 18-inch out back. It's got maybe 7 or more inches of suspension travel. Those are the kind of things where it starts to belay itself as like, this is not just a bike that's designed for street use. And I think that as you think about the difference between a dual sport and an ADV, my biggest point here is that if you buy an adventure bike and you want to use it as a dual sport, it is a dual sport motorcycle. If you buy an adventure bike and you want to just ride it on the street, like maybe it's not a dual sport motorcycle to you. But I do think that talking about the capability of some of these adventure bikes is important because as we've seen over the past 5 years, they've become incredibly capable to the point where in some cases, I think they're more fun. And I actually got into this in the comments section the other day, but like when I'm out riding around the Black Hills with Patrick Garvin and there's a systematic trail network of like fire roads and then like ATV trails, like that is more fun for me on my 890 than on my 350 because the 350, the way it's geared and set up, like after 50 miles an hour, it feels like it's wound out. It's not really fun to take down a fire road because it's too small and it's just kind of boring after a while. Whereas, taking the 890 down a fire road, like you can hit little bumps and bruises and like it's, challenging to the extent of being fun. So I do think that, one of the points that I want to make is that there are times where riding an adventure bike off-road can be more enjoyable and more fun than doing it on a dual sport. Would either of you agree or disagree with something like that?
Somebody really hurt you in that comment section, didn't they?
They did.
You're like, you know what? I'm going to make a whole episode. Listen here, Steve 720. I got a thing to tell you.
But it's aside from Steve 720, it is a common theme that we constantly hear, and I just want to kind of put it to bed because these bikes have gotten very capable, and I think if someone that's just starting out is going through the comment section, they're hearing this debate and they're trying to figure out what all the hoopla is about and what people are really talking about. Like, yes, for a beginner rider, if you are asking me which bike is easier to ride, a CRF 300L Rally or an 890R, the 300L Rally is an easier, more approachable bike to ride, and it's probably the better choice for you. But that's the same debate we could get into is like, hey, if you're starting off on the racetrack, should you buy a Ninja 400 or, a BMW S1000 RR? Like, the Ninja's probably a better bike. But if you're a capable motorcyclist that's looking at riding off-road, and maybe you've got a few years of off-road riding under your belt, like, an adventure motorcycle is a dual sport motorcycle, especially if that's how you want to use it, because they've gotten so darn capable.
Yeah, I've been using my adventure bike exactly like I used my dual sport in the past couple of years, with the exception of I've been riding it farther. I can ride it over to Wyoming and do the same thing, where I can't do that with my dual sport. I would say where the differences come into play is when you, for me, and I've had a couple of lessons here lately, is like being able to, or riding it fast like I would my dual sport. Like if I want to, like the 890 is so it will go anywhere. I've taken my dual sport in the Black Hills. I've already taken the 890, no problem. But the rate of speed that you want to do it at, or I can do it out of my adventure bike, is different than my enduro. When you start speeding up, the margin of error gets narrower on the 890. And for me, and I'm an average dirt rider, let's say, I can't make the mistakes that I would be able to get away with on my enduro bike. I can't quite get away with those yet on my 890. But as far as like, it is, my adventure bike has never stopped me from going anywhere in the dirt that I went on my enduro bike. And to your point, Spurge, like those 2 tracks and fire roads and stuff like that, they are funner on an adventure bike. They just are. So that's why I've been using that bike, and I think in time I'll learn to ride it faster, like I do on my enduro. But for me, that's the difference in the dirt. It's probably the weight and the margin for error at higher speeds.
I would say too, I think one of the main differences is going to be around the electronics, and I think it was either Spenser or Patrick, you hit on this earlier. On my 350, it's not the same electronic suite, right? So right. I actually came from reverse of most people. I started riding adventure bikes as my entry level to off-road. And then I went smaller as I got into I was really starting to push the boundaries of what was possible on an adventure bike, and also where my personal limitations kind of came into play. And, as I got into some of the more, enduro and dual sport riding, I ended up getting a smaller bike. And I remember, and I might have told this story on High Side, Low Side before, my first time on the 350, I was out with some friends, and my buddy Jeff was like, hey man, like you can use a little bit more front brake. I really see you kind of digging into the rear brake and you're sliding around, but like, don't be afraid to use that front brake. And I was like, good to know. Awesome. Front brake, more of it.
Watch this.
And so Jeff came to a stop in front of me, and I grabbed all the front brake, locked the front tire, flipped the bike over, and I ended up laying on the ground like a little turtle underneath him. And he looked down and he's like, not that much front brake. And I was like, good to know. But my point in telling that story is I came from the adventure bike side of things. And the adventure bike side of things, all the adventure bikes that I had owned up until that point had off-road ABS, which allowed off-road to be maintained in a reduced capacity at the front wheel while being off in the rear. So, from a learning curve standpoint, if I were to grab too much front brake on my 890 or my Tiger 800, the bike wouldn't just lock up on me. It was a bit more of a forgiving learning experience. And then I had to go back and learn to break some of those bad habits when I got a bike that didn't have the electronic rider aid. So I think, one of the main differences with an adventure bike is you typically have more options for, be it cruise control from a comfort standpoint or electronic rider aids as just an electronic standpoint. I think there's a more sophisticated electronic suite that's there.
I've got a little perspective for your guy, your very creatively named commenter, Steve720.
I think you named him. I just want to be clear. Okay.
Yeah, to be clear, Steve720 is not his real name. If you can believe it, I came up with that on the spot. But one of the things I love about adventure bikes off-road that I think not many people talk about or maybe acknowledge is that I like riding adventure bikes off-road because I benefit from low expectations. And really, that's where I like to operate in my riding abilities, is I'm a very mediocre off-road rider. And if I go out there on either an actual enduro bike or a kind of hardcore dual sport, people are going to see some hill climb or some gnarly rutted out section and be like, yeah, man, you're on a 350 EXC. Like, just go do it. And then I have to go and stumble and embarrass myself and be like, oh, I don't know, it's really hard. But if I go and I do that and I fall over on an adventure bike, then I can be like, well, I'm on an adventure bike, you guys. This stuff's pretty tricky, am I right? So I like that we lower expectations with an adventure bike. And then on the occasion that I make it through the rutted section on the ADV, people are just like, oh, you're amazing at this. How did you even get up on that 500-pound bike? This is incredible. You would probably be really good at riding off-road. And I just say, yes, I would. And let's just leave it at that. But I'm only ever going to ride adventure bikes, so you'll never know. So the point in saying that is, I think when you ride an adventure bike, and especially when you're in a group of people riding adventure bikes, people shift their expectations in a way that can make it really fun. Like you acknowledge the fact that it is inherently more challenging, and you're in that together with people. So it's not all about hanging it out and just doing the gnarliest hill climb in the entire range that you're in. But instead, it's like, oh, let's see if we can get through. Let's try to make it through this sand wash or up this hill climb or down this wash, whatever it might be. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had if you sort of recalibrate those expectations.
How did you make it through? A wish and a prair.
A wish and a prayer.
I closed my eyes and I just grabbed a handful of throttle and held on.
Yeah, and the motorcycle is borrowed, so.
No, I think it's a great point. And I think, I see it even with my friend group. When we go out and do an adventure event, whether it's, the stuff that I've done with the both of you, or it's, even some of the local stuff like the Pine Barrens 500 or other things, like, it's more of the camaraderie. We're going to get through it together. And like, if someone's riding, a bit slower, like everybody just helps people through it. Whereas if you're on a dual sport event, or an enduro race, like there's an expectation there of like, you're going to get through it. Like, and like, you're not going to help each other out. You'll wait for somebody at the end of the road versus like making sure in the moment that you're tackling it together. And I think there is a bit more of that camaraderie that goes along, especially for people that are, maybe they're doing a BDR with their adventure bike and they're going out with their buddies for, 7 days at a time. Like there is that camaraderie aspect of the travel and the pack atmosphere that kind of, comes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, well, I feel like this yet again segues to a bit of a wrap-up question, which is the idea, is dual sporting right for you? And I know I'm skipping over, we're skipping over one question of, what's the greatest dual sport of all time? I feel like we've talked about a lot of those, but I guess I like this idea, since we're talking about adventure bikes versus dual sports and expectations. Is dual sporting right for you? Like, people are listening right now where someone comes up to you at a rally and they say, Patrick, I'm interested in dual sporting, but I don't know if I'm gonna like it. Like, who is the target demo for getting a dual sport bike, and why should they, listen to that instinct, or why should they pursue that?
I would tell them. I mean, I guess I would put it like this: if I had to give up all other forms of motorcycling and just do that, I would choose dual sporting because I enjoy it so much, and I'm kind of, like I said, fresh to it as of about 2018. But it's the ability, like, to me, riding on just paved roads seems so like locked down. You know what I mean? Where if you have the ability just to hop off on a trail and take off and go chuck something out, like that is such a like more freeing way to ride a motorcycle. When I'm going down a 2-lane and I see a trail, I'm like, oh, I wonder what's over there. I just go over there and find out. I just go look. So to me, I would be like, yes, definitely you should take up dual sporting. If your budget allows it, definitely get a dual sport. If I had to choose just one type of motorcycle, that's what it would be, because it gives me the ability to, like, it just unlocks the other levels of riding a motorcycle. I can just kind of go do whatever I want. Whereas if I have a bike that's just for the road or just for the dirt, I have to, like, if it's just a dirt bike, I have to throw it in a truck or a trailer, take it to where I want to ride. I can ride in that location. I really can't leave that location. Same thing on a street bike. I have to stay on the street. Whereas a dual sport, I can just kind of go do whatever I want, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Spenser, what about you? I have an answer that I feel and I fear might infringe on yours. So I'm going to let you go first. as the guest host, just because I don't want to steal your answer.
You just want the last word. I get it.
No, because I'm going to bring us back to the other question once we're done with this. So, like, it won't be the last word. I promise you that.
Okay. Well, thank God for that. Yeah, I think, Patrick, I 100% agree with your answer. It's such a versatile machine to have in your garage. It's called a dual sport, but frankly, you can do kind of anything with it. Like, you could take a dual sport to a track day if you throw on the right tires. You can tour it if you are willing to tolerate a bit more discomfort and going slower for filling up gas or whatever it might be. But one of the things that I really appreciate about dual sports is that it just makes you a better rider to have a bike that pushes you into those uncomfortable situations. If all you ever do is ride in the dirt, or all you ever do is ride on the street, it's like using half of your brain as a motorcyclist. Like, you really need to do both of them in order to get better at both of them, because riding in the dirt makes you a better street rider, and riding in the street maybe makes you a better dirt rider, but the point is, it just makes you a more well-rounded motorcyclist in general. And the great thing about dual sports is that there is such a spectrum of intensity for those motorcycles. So if you're just getting started out, then yeah, go get a CRF 300L. It is such a delightful machine. It has a low seat height. You can ride it on the street, you can ride it to work, and then you can bop down some dirt roads and start to get used to that sensation of, sliding around a little bit, or seeing what it feels like when you go over a little jump. And on the flip side, if you're super hardcore and you just want to go thrash a BDR as fast as you can, then yeah, get a Husky 701 LR and just absolutely rip through these wide open roads at whatever speed you want to. That frankly is going to be probably pretty close to what you would do even on a dedicated, dirt bike, and certainly in the realm of what you would do on an adventure bike. So I just think it makes you a better rider.
That was a huge missed opportunity to do the Spurgeon Dunbar voice, and I just want you to know that Zach Quartz would have not missed that opportunity.
Well,
so
we had a good streak.
Yeah,
nothing
I'm
good.
going to have to take a point away from you on that one.
That's okay.
So the core of the question is dual sporting right for you, right? And I think there's 2 points here. Is a dual sport motorcycle right for you versus is dual sporting right for you, where you want to actually go out and ride off-road? I think a dual sport motorcycle could be right for a lot of people. And I think the one area that oftentimes gets overlooked is people that do live in the city. Dual sports are lightweight, they're affordable. The CRF 300L is a perfect example of that. Like, it's a great city bike. Even if you have no intention of leaving the city, it'll absorb potholes. It's going to get 70 miles to the gallon. It's lightweight. You can maneuver it around. It's very maneuverable. So, like, I think a dual sport motorcycle could be right for a wide range of people. And that's what I was afraid that I was going to step on your toes with, Spenser, because I know that you've made that point in the past. Is dual sporting right for you? The way that I would put this is that I again got into dual sporting on the large side of things. I didn't have a pickup truck at the time, and I wanted to try this. I wanted to go out and try this off-road thing. So, large dual sport in the form of an adventure bike is really how I got started. And what was amazing to me was how hard it was. I got started riding in the Pine Barrens, which is deep sand, on a 500-pound Tiger 800. And it was like, I thought I was good at motorcycling, and I found out that I wasn't, like, at all. And it was this new form of challenging that was so exciting and rewarding. And all of a sudden, I was a kid again, splashing through puddles in the woods, and I was having fun on motorcycles in a way that, like, I didn't realize I needed, if I'm being completely honest. And whereas on the street, I found myself, I had moved back to Philadelphia. It took me, 30 minutes to get outside the city, and, like, the roads weren't as good as some of the roads I had in other areas. And oftentimes my ability was exceeding the posted speed limit. So to me, to go at a speed in which I was really enjoying myself, I was oftentimes not adhering to the posted, regulated limits of how fast the bike should be going. Whereas off-road, I couldn't go as fast as I was allowed to go. It became this new challenge, and I talked about this on a previous episode where I went and did my first enduro race, and it was a timekeeping enduro. And I was talking with Spenser about this over the weekend. Whereas, with the timekeeping enduro, you have to, you can't go above or below a certain time. The idea is to be, just at this certain time. But like, I think the off-road speed is like 30 miles an hour. So if you're going over 30 miles an hour, you can actually go too fast for a timekeeping enduro. I can't do 30 miles an hour in some of this tight single track. Like, some of this tight single track is so aggressive that, like, if you're doing 15 miles an hour on average, like, you're feeling like a rock star. So I think for me, dual sporting just opened up an entirely different realm of enjoyment for me when it comes to motorcycling. And I still enjoy getting on the bike and riding around town, and I still enjoy going to do a track day on a cement track or a paved track. But like, nothing has brought me more joy in my almost 20 years of motorcycling as learning how to ride off-road. And I didn't learn how to ride off-road in a motocross track. I think that that's prohibitive. Or just buying a dirt bike only is prohibitive, because then all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, I can only use this bike in an off-road situation, which means I need a pickup truck or I need a trailer, and I'm going to commit to going and using this bike in only one way. I think dual sporting is a more affordable way to open up yourself to a completely different form of riding.
So I said we weren't curing cancer, but I don't know, Spurge, do dual sports cure cancer? Because that sounds like it's the panacea of all your troubles in the motorcycling world. It
brings a smile to your face, and it washes worry away. So
that's worth something.
So let's close this out before we move on to the Rev Trivia game. And this is purely opinion based. What is the greatest example of a dual sport motorcycle ever? Guest honors, Patrick Garvin. I think Patrick has frozen. Either that, or he's just thinking very hard about the answer to this question.
Long and hard thought here.
Yeah.
Don't rush, Patrick. Take your time.
Yep. We're going to get him back, folks. Don't worry. We're going to give a quick pause. Bernie's going to fix this in post. Don't you worry.
He's just Googling best dual sport of all time. He's never ridden a dual sport. He doesn't know.
Yeah. Well, the important thing is that through the magic of editing, the audience is never going to realize the trials and tribulations that we're all facing right now, because this is going to be seamless. And like this, Patrick Garvin will be back. And you're back in. And now all of a sudden we're going to go on like there wasn't a technical difficulty. So the question posed to you, guest honors, Patrick Garvin, what is the greatest example of a dual sport motorcycle? And frankly, Spencer and I were having a conversation while you were gone. We don't think that you were having technical difficulties at all. We think you intentionally froze so that you could Google best dual sport motorcycle ever, with the hopes that Wikipedia was going to give you an answer, which seems to be some of the theme of this episode, is just going right to Wikipedia to find the correct answer.
Our sponsor, Wikipedia.
Yeah. What do you think, Garvin?
Man, I there's a motorcycle that I want to say, but I know...
Do it.
I'm such a KTM honk that it's...
Oh, don't do it. I take it back. Regret.
I was going to say, I mean, is it a 500 EXC? I can't say that because, oh man, the KTM references on here. You know what? If I'm going with personal experience, that's very limited on dual sport motorcycles, but I kind of have to go with my own bike, because it's that I have an '08 Kawasaki KLX 450R with just about to turn 40,000 miles on the odometer that I bought for $500. A lot of people have heard the story of my $500 motorcycle, but I almost have 20,000 of those miles on it since 2018. And it is, for me, just such an awesome motorcycle. That is going to be my pick. I mean, it's just treated me so well. I can't not pick it.
Okay. Spencer, what do you think?
I'm going to go with greatest, not from a performance standpoint, because I don't want to say KTM. So not from a performance standpoint, but from like a cultural standpoint, the greatest dual sport of all time. And I think to go back to this, Suzuki, I'm looking out for you. You need this win. I appreciate you still riding this wave. DR650. To me, that is just like you open the dictionary of and you go to dual sport, and there is a picture of a DR650 right there. It is just quintessential, rudimentary and simple and not particularly refined in any way, but it just like it defines that category so perfectly. So even though it's not the highest performing, I think it is fair to call that the greatest dual sport of all time.
So it's interesting. I kind of attacked this from the same way you did. I think, Patrick, my limitations with your pick are the fact that like it's a bit harder to get luggage for. I think you're probably a little bit more performance oriented in your pick. Spenser, I'm kind of leaning with you. I'm trying to think of like quintessentially what is the greatest dual sport of all time, from like whether it's an expert in motorcycling history or it's a layman that's getting into this for the first time. And I'm going to go with a Kawasaki KLR 650. And I think about like the cultural impact that bike has had, and the generations of riders that have gotten into motorcycling or gotten into dual sporting because of a KLR 650. In my circle of friends, there's no shortage of people that had a KLR 650 as their first motorcycle in the dual sport world. Myself, my first ride on a motorcycle ever was on the back of a KLR 600, which belonged to Uncle Bob. And to me, it's just, that is the quintessential dual sport. And I can understand why your pick is a DR. I'm not saying you're wrong, like I am with Patrick. But I think a KLR 650 is probably more recognizable in most people's mind than a Suzuki is.
How did we not talk about the KLR 650 as blurring the lines between dual sport and adventure bike?
Yes.
No, what a miss. We're awful at this.
And hasn't Kawasaki just kind of reframed that bike since they brought it back as an adventure bike and not as a dual sport?
What I will say is that riding the newest generation, and I talked about this in the review that I did last year, it is definitely more comfortable on the street than I think previous generations were. I did not quite, and Spenser knows this because I showed up at his front door after it was done, but I did almost an iron butt ride with it, where I rode from northern New Mexico to southern California to Spenser's studio where he's shooting this right now. And I ended up doing, the way that I mapped it out, I was actually trying to stop and surprise Spenser's parents. I wanted to get a selfie of like me and his mom and dad and just like text it to him, because I went
through the window taking pictures of my family.
But I went right by the old Robert Ranch on that trek. But like my point is that I think the first day was like 800 miles and the second day was like 600 miles, and then the day before that on the ride was actually like 400 miles over 2 days. So like all in all, it was like almost like 2,000 miles crammed into 4 days of riding, and it was really enjoyable. It was not miserable, but it was small enough that like for people that are just getting into off-road riding, it's manageable, it's approachable. I think a lot of people see that bike as usable from a beginner standpoint, but like even as an expert, like, and I use the term expert loosely. Let's say as a motorcycle professional, because would never consider myself an expert. I had a great time with it. It was lovable. It was very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, we should be flogged for not mentioning that bike sooner.
I think there's one more, and maybe I missed it. The Honda XR650.
XR650. Yeah, to me, the XR650, DR650, that I was in my mind, I was like, which direction I go? And then I thought, well, Suzuki, they really need that win. So I'll give them another tally in that category. But I think, Patrick, what you just mentioned about how the KLR 650 has become a little bit more of an adventure bike is interesting, because the very first generation of that bike, even though it was essentially unchanged for years and years, it doesn't really look like what the KLR 650 is today. Like, it has gotten bigger. There's more wind protection. There's more fuel. It started out a lot more like the DR 650, just kind of like a very simple dual sport, and then just sort of grew. So that is another example of one of those bikes that just, it really does blur the line between adventure and dual sport, because it's really great at almost nothing, but it's totally serviceable at just about everything. So good on you, Spurgeon, for bringing it back around to the KLR 650 before everyone in the comments section.
We talked about Wayne Mitchell and his crew doing the Where the Road Ends, and they did it on KLR 650s, and I was waiting for somebody else to bring that up, because I knew where I wanted to talk about it, but I'm disappointed in both of you. And if we take away nothing from this podcast, hopefully you both learned a valuable lesson today, and that's to not underestimate nor to forget about the beloved KLR 650.
Touche.
So would we agree that is the greatest example of a dual sport of all time?
No.
No, I'm not going there.
It's great. It's one of them.
It's really good.
I was trying to get us to come back to like a nice kumbaya moment.
It's on the Mount Rushmore of dual sports.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. But it's not. I'm not saying it's the GOAT.
So you've heard it here first, people. We cannot agree. And if we can't agree, I'm sure that you can't agree either. I'm sure there's lots of comments and questions flowing below us on the video on YouTube right now, or maybe you're angrily typing out an email to send to highsidelowside.com for the dual sport of choice that we forgot to mention. But for now, we are going to wrap up the conversation portion of this podcast and get into the engine sound guessing game. Some are saying that this is the best thing to happen to trivia since Wheel of Fortune. I'm not saying that those people are wrong. So we're going to jump in here. For those of you that are listening to High Side, Low Side for the first time, welcome. This is the portion of the podcast where we play Rev Trivia. We have a engine sound. The three of us are all in the dark as to what the engine sound is. We are going to play the engine sound for roughly 20 to 30 seconds. You will hear the engine sound as well. Play along with us. Take a guess. Scream at your car stereo if you are riding along, listening whilst driving. First sound that's going to come out, then we'll get into some hints. Gentlemen, Spenser, this is your first time playing? Is that correct?
It is. It is my first time. So if I'm not good at it, that's why I haven't practiced.
All right. Well, Patrick, you did very well. Patrick was on earlier in season 6. He's already done very well with the first one. So without any further ado, let's hear the sound. It's an Echo Weed Whacker. Our producer Chase was trying to fool us. That is a 2-stroke Weed Whacker, and I'm pretty sure he snuck into my garage while I was sleeping to get that audio clip.
Well, it's not a KLR 650.
No.
Which I thought it was going to be a KLR. I thought this was all some setup, like you had been pulling some strings and you were just going to rub it in our face. But yeah.
Let's be clear. I'm playing along with you.
Sure you don't.
I have no idea. Mm-hmm. You know what? For your first time playing this game, you're undermining the authority of the game. You're accusing me of cheating, and I will not stand for it. You know what? Zach Kortz would never do that. I'm taking another point away. What do you think? So, Spenser, you first. You've never played the game before. What sound were you listening to? Are you in the hints document? Do I see you?
Spenser. I did. I haven't looked at it yet. I just opened it.
Yeah, talking about cheating.
I have zero chance. It sounds like a 2-stroke. It sounds kind of spicy, but all 2-strokes sound spicy to me. So, I can guess a KTM 300. I would be disappointed if it wasn't a dual sport is the thing. So I'm gravitating towards 2-stroke dual sports. I guess it could be the DT1. I don't know what the DT1 sounds like, but I would say KTM 300 because I have absolutely no clue.
Patrick Garvin.
So I feel a lot of pressure here because I did so well the first one. Also, the first one was so lined up for me to do well at. Like, obviously it's 2-stroke. I think it's an air-cooled 2-stroke. It doesn't sound as like tight or crisp as a late model, let's say 2-stroke. And I'm gonna go 73 CR 250.
Wow,
very specific.
I have a reason. After we hear the results, I'll tell you the reason.
Okay, so I know I'm gonna agree with you in the fact that I don't think it's a modern 2-stroke.
Me neither. I didn't.
No,
mean
you
that
said KTM 300.
No, I think you said that.
No.
Patrick, you heard Spurgeon say that, right?
I'm pretty sure I heard that. Yeah.
I've spent enough time. I've spent enough time trying to keep up with my friends Jeff and Liz Canary, and both of them ride 300 KTM 2-strokes. They're much faster than I am, and I'm trying to keep up with them, eating their 2-stroke dust. And I know that's. I'm going to say vintage 2-stroke. I'm gonna go through a hint here before I make a final guess, but I'm going to say vintage 2-stroke, single cylinder. Just so we're clear, I am with the two of you that this is a single cylinder. Hint number 1. Ooh, This model was originally released in 1968.
Oh.
Spenser, your KTM 300 is wrong.
I also said the DT1, which I can't remember if the first year the DT1 was 68 or 69. I thought it was 69, but
69, I'm pretty sure.
So maybe it's not that. What was it? What you said a CR? You say a CR250, Patrick?
Yeah.
What was the first year of that? Do you know? What was the first year of the Elsinore?
Elsinore was 73, I want to say. Was it 72 or 73? I think this is the 50th anniversary of the Elsinore, so it might be 72. It might have been 70. It was either 72 or 73 for the Elsinore, so that would have been too late. And just so we're clear, we're talking about the Honda Elsinore, which was the big revolutionary two-stroke dirt bike that they created, and that was 72 or 73.
Was that the Rambo First Blood bike?
No, I don't.
Was that Elsinore?
You're asking the right guy, because if anyone here would know that, it's Spenser Robert.
Yeah.
Yeah, as the preeminent Rambo historian on this podcast. No, I remember him riding a little two-smoker, but I don't remember what it was. Was it?
Pretty sure it was a
plated?
Honda. It had a headlight, and it was plated.
All right, so it wasn't the Elsinore then.
I'm going to make a note for producer Chase. When we do the version 2 of the best motorcycle movies and films, let's talk about Rambo First Blood. But for the sake of this game, let's go on to hint number 2. Hint number 2 is popular platform for everything from dual sporting to desert racing to flat tracking.
Did they use the DT1 for flat tracking at all that you know, Patrick?
I'm sure it has been used, yeah, but I don't know how popular it was. Generally, two-strokes weren't like popular flat track platforms.
Yeah, I'm just struggling to think of a sort of
same
ubiquitous two-stroke platform, which I know they made a boatload of the DTs, and obviously Yamaha had street-oriented two-strokes and dirt-oriented two-strokes in that era. So just like it started in the late 60s, it's a two-stroke. It was used for a bunch of different things. I know that the years don't exactly line up, but I'm just going to guess DT1 because it's here, and it feels like that's a little bit silly if I don't throw it out there on the off chance that it's right.
Well, you already guessed KTM 300, so now you're changing your answer. You're just making up rules as you go along.
The record is fuzzy on that. The record is really fuzzy.
Patrick?
I'm sticking with my answer just because it's a shot in the dark, and the reason is this area is working on one, and I recently seen footage of his running, and I was hoping that maybe this sound came from the bike Ari was working on. So
well, he was also working on this DT1, so you and I are using the same strategy.
Well, it was funny. That's why I was originally guessing the Elsinore in my head because I know that he just finished restoring one. He actually just had an audio clip up on Instagram.
That's what I was going off of also.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm gonna go with you, Spenser. I think knowing that this bike, the timeline is. I know I wanted to say 69 too, but I'm gonna say the bike behind you, the Yamaha DT1, is probably gonna be my final guess. So without any further ado. The answer, this engine sound today, was a 1977 Yamaha DT250, which is essentially a DT1 by any other name.
But Patrick, you said CR250, so it's kind of like everybody's right. If we combined our answers, then we're all correct.
So this was a 1977 Yamaha DT250. Right in theme with the podcast episode of Dual Sporting. It was sourced by David Scannell. Am I pronouncing that right? Producer Chase is shaking his head. Scannell. So David, thank you for shooting an email in. Make sure you go ahead and email us your T-shirt size. We are letting you know, David, we have picture engine sound. David wanted us to know has no modifications. It is an air-cooled two-stroke single. And he is not the original owner. And I just made that up. David, I'm not sure if you're the original owner or not because you did not let us know that in your email. But again, if you would like to help us play the engine sound guessing game, please shoot us an email over to highside, at RevZilla.com with your engine sound. Should be about 25 to 30 seconds long. Should be at idle. Should have a few good revs in there. And you will see if you can stump the high side, low side hosts. But I think, listen, gentlemen, I'm going to give us a little bit of credit today.
Other than you guessing the 300, I thought that went pretty well.
You know what, Spenser? let the record state that this is a recorded episode, and we're going to go back and we're going to check with the old courtroom stenographer.
Bernie,
and we're
I
going
will
to
pay
figure
you
out
good money to cut that out. I will pay you my $5 I won earlier.
All right. Well, at this point in the podcast, we are going to jump into listeners' comments, and that means that, Patrick, it's time for us to just bid you adieu. Thank you, as always, for joining us on the High Side, Low Side podcast. You are always so enjoyable to talk about motorcycling with.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I cannot wait to read the comment section of this one.
See you, buddy.
See you guys. See ya.
Always a pleasure having Patrick on the episode. And what I will say is that, Spenser, you've done a great job. As Zach Quartz today, I've got my little tally up here on the screen is I've got 4 notches for Zach Quartz imitation, and you've nailed it. Now, that doesn't include the ones that I've had to take away for the missed opportunities of not doing something Zach would do.
Wait. Can I get another one right now? All right. But that's a whole other podcast. There we go. Mark it down. Put it down.
And
I
if
feel
you're
good about
playing
that
along
one.
to the RevZilla drinking game, you're probably, or the High Side, Low Side drinking game, you're probably already slammed from the amount of times we've referenced KTM. But if not, you can take a drink for the Zach Quartz saying is probably an entirely other podcast. But let's move on to our T-shirt winner for the day. Remember, we like to round things out. We pick a T-shirt winner from those of you who left us an agreeable review on Apple Podcasts. We would remind you, please leave us an Apple Podcast review if you have not done so. If you've already done so, please create a second account and leave us another review, because those reviews do a lot in the way of helping people find the show, and it helps us to make the show better, because we listen to all of your critiques and we listen to none of it after we read through. We are then going to move on to the High Side, Low Side comments, but we'll get to that in a minute. Spenser, I know that we let you pick the winner today, so why don't you go ahead and give us this one?
Yeah, and just to give people a little insight on the way I picked the comment, or the review, there was a lot of great reviews out there. I wanted it to be, as sort of democratic as possible, so I printed them off, I put them in a hat, I pulled them out blindly, and this is the one that I happened to pick out. Completely random. It surprised me as much as anyone. The subject of this review is more cowbell and more Spenser Robert. And he technically says Spenser Roberts with an S, and my last name is Robert, so we'll take a slight point off, but it's a promising start. And in his review, N. Zanin says, I agree 100% with Mr. Robert. The Vespa is the most beautiful motorcycle. So this is in reference to our What is the Most Beautiful Motorcycle podcast.
That was from 2 seasons ago. How far back in the reviews did you go to find the one guy that was giving you accolades?
I realized that it may look like I went into the reviews and I hit Command F and I typed in my name until I found the one review that happened to mention me. But that would clearly be narcissistic in a way that it would just be an abuse of power. So I certainly didn't do that. Coincidence, as I said. Anyway, he agrees 100% with Mr. Robert. That's flattering, and thank you so much. And then he goes on to say, my daily commuter is a Honda CB500X. It is purposeful and invisible. It is not beautiful. Last year, I was given a non-running 2006 Vespa LX50 in Prugna, which is plum purple. It is possibly the most basic Vespa, but I loved learning everything about it and how to repair it with a combination of the shop manual, archival high side, low side, and RevZilla videos. Every time I ride it, it receives multiple compliments. Truck drivers to Miata drivers give thumbs up and head nods of approval. It will even get the occasional motorcycle salute from a cruiser rider, which is no easy feat when you're on a scooter. And then he wraps it up by saying, P.S. I love the podcast and have enjoyed every episode. I'm an elementary school English teacher who could use a free T-shirt. Well, and Zanin, the stars aligned and your randomly selected review will absolutely yield you a free T-shirt. And I also want to point out for anyone else looking to leave a review that by sheer coincidence, 100% of the people that have left flattering reviews that mention me have also won a T-shirt, because there's only one comment that was flattering. So I'm just saying, statistically, if you would like to win a T-shirt, you can really improve your odds by just saying flattering things about me. And if history is any indication, you'll have a T-shirt in the mail.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Quartz is sure to have another child at some point, and we'll need somebody else to help me guide this train home. So, yeah, there's a good chance that you'll be on here again. So what I will say is that I thought it was interesting, too, that N. Zanin rides a CB500X as a daily commuter, which is a bike that could arguably be a dual sport or an adventure bike, depending on how you look at it. Yeah. So, again, send your address and your T-shirt size to highside-lowside@RevZilla.com and Zanin, and we will make sure to hook you up with a free T-shirt. You can wear it in whilst you're teaching English to all the kids out there, maybe on like Fridays when you're allowed to wear jeans. I know we used to do that when I was teaching high school. We'd all throw $1 in the pot, and we were allowed to wear jeans, and then the money was used for charity, or so I was told. But you can probably wear a high side, low side T-shirt in there on Friday as well and educate all your kids about the antics that goes on America's favorite podcast, High Side, Low Side. Now, we move on to the comments section, and I would again encourage you, if you've got questions, comments, concerns, shoot us an email to highside-lowside@RevZilla.com, and we will address the ones that we find the most interesting. The first one up is from Brendan, who wrote an email in saying, I enjoy flicking through bikes that are for sale. I was fortunate to get back into riding with the purchase of a used 2016 R1M in around 2018-2019. For those of you listening that aren't familiar, the R1M is the big leader sport bike with all the bells and whistles from Yamaha. It is pretty much top of the line in the world of sport motorcycles.
It's spicy.
Brendan was originally looking for older bikes, 2004, 2005 Honda CBR 1000RRs, or sport bikes of a similar vintage. However, the price of older bikes seems artificially high. I wonder if videos such as Dave the Gixxer, where Spenser Robert took Ari Henning and Zach Quartz out to a racetrack and they used a old Gixxer 1000 to beat a brand new Ducati, and or other fun adventures on older bikes from ourselves or other YouTube personalities are inflating the prices of older bikes. Brendan goes on to say, I'm not pointing a finger. Please keep in mind that I enjoy your content. Just curious to your thoughts about what are driving the prices up. And he does make a point that he feels that the prices were higher before COVID, so not using COVID as an excuse. Spenser, what are your thoughts here?
Well, as is clearly no secret on the podcast at this point, I love flattery. And the idea that we could be making videos like the Dave the Gixxer episode that inflates the price of that bike in the used market is that's a pretty incredible thought. They would have that big of an impact. But I think if I'm being honest, I know he said this is pre-COVID. My guess is that this has more to do with scarcity than anything else. So if he's looking for a super clean, low mileage, never been tracked, never been wrecked, just like pristine 04, 05 CBR 1000, there's just not probably going to be as many of those as, perhaps a clean, relatively low mileage R1 of a more modern era. So I think it's a little bit of a tricky balance because, it may seem artificially high, I guess, but it depends on what you value. So if the price is ultimately so high that you feel like you should just get a bike that's 10 years newer and has more technology, then yeah, I feel like he made a good decision there. But I think for a lot of people, the nostalgia is playing into why those prices get so high. And, if that's what you really want, then yeah, don't be afraid to pay a little extra and get that bike from a generation that really speaks to you. But
yeah, I think
it's.
I would agree. I think it's supply and demand. I think as bikes become older, they just naturally become more scarce. Especially when you're looking at sport bikes, which oftentimes were rode hard and put away wet. And that's where for people that were taking those bikes to the track or they were using them, and some of them were crashed, and some of them were marred up, and some of them were rebuilt, and some of them were taken to the junkyard. So at some point, you do see the decline of prices. You buy a new motorcycle and there's a decline, when you take it off the showroom floor, but at some point it bottoms out. And then there's a natural, acceleration. And I think, the example that I'll use here is, and this will actually tie into comment number 2 really well, but like when I bought my 99 Honda VFR, it was like $2,500. I think I actually got it for less than that. I think it was probably like 2,000. But then most recently, I've seen, clean examples of Honda VFRs from the late 90s selling for $4,000 to $5,000. So now you're starting to see this accelerate a little bit, where as those bikes become increasingly scarce and there is some, nostalgia around them, people want to go back and get one, and they're probably, making a little bit more money now than they were 10 years ago, and they're willing to spend a little bit more money to get what they want, especially if it's a clean example. So, I think that's probably more so what Brendan is experiencing than what the general world has experienced over the past 2.5 years. And his point about COVID is true. Like, motorcycles have become more popular in the past 2.5 years with COVID. Motorcycles have then become more scarce because of a couple different factors. One, the increase in demand, and then two, the supply chain issues that we've all been experiencing across every walk of life. So used motorcycle prices in general have increased in the past, 2.5 years.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be motorcycle specific. I don't think it's as a blanket statement saying every model of motorcycle that's 10 or 15 years old is going to start going up in value. I think you can probably find some real duds. I've got an 83 Honda Shadow here that I do not think is currently increasing in value.
Every time you're on this podcast, you try and sell us a Shadow.
Well, that's the only one. This is, I'm trying to play into Brendan's comment here and see if I can jack that price up, But I guess the point is, if it was a bike that was desirable when it came out, and especially if it's become a cult bike since then, obviously those are going to start inflating in price and maybe disproportionately seem like they're expensive compared to a new motorcycle. But if you're just looking for a run-of-the-mill bike that's 15 or 20 years old and it's in mediocre condition, then I don't think you should feel like you're paying an absolute premium for one of those.
Yeah. Well, this is going to tie into the next comment a little bit. Spencer, why don't you take this one for us?
Yeah, this is an interesting comment, and this is from Snayhole, and it's got a little bit of a spooky vibe. So I'm going to do my best true crime impression as I take you down this sordid tale of seller's remorse.
It's almost Halloween.
This is Halloween.
This is actually going to tie in perfectly.
Okay. All right. I got to get in the mindset. Here we go. They said, I'm in a weird situation and would like your advice. I purchased a 1981 BMW R100 RT from a guy in Philadelphia. He had it for around 19 years and took good care of it. He was even nice enough to ride to my part of town and hand it over. I paid the asking price and thought that was the end of the story.
Was it the end of the story?
Oh no, it was not. 2 years passed and I moved to Maryland. One day I got an email from the guy sent to my work email. I had never shared where I worked, nor did he know I had moved. Ooh. He asked how the BMW was and some generic questions about it. While I was a bit disturbed he found me, I responded with some niceties and assurance that the BMW was fine and currently in storage. Now, this person is asking me to sell the BMW back to him. He regrets selling the bike, and it has a lot of sentimental value as he got engaged to his wife while on it or something. Pause for effect. He is being nice, but has put me in a very awkward situation. I don't want to sell it. This bike was kind of a dream purchase for me, and I have major plans to do a complete rehab, not restoration. What would you do in this situation?
Well, I think what's really terrifying about this story is that the person went from living in Philadelphia to living in Maryland. And, whether you're looking at the city of Philadelphia or the state of Maryland, both terrifying places.
Yeah, I'm not from the East Coast.
Yeah.
I don't know who that's insulting more, but I assume someone's getting insulted there.
I'm aiming my crosshairs at both people from Maryland as well as people from Philadelphia.
Nice.
So, joking aside, I think Snehal is probably being a bit sensitive here. I mean, honestly, you can go to LinkedIn, type in someone's name, and get their work email address a lot easier than you can find out their personal address. I think that the way the internet has made information like that a little bit more accessible doesn't frighten me. Maybe Snehal is of a different age where that's a bit more sensitive. I don't know, but what I would say is that if I had a bike that I sold to someone and I decided that I wanted to get it back, I would do whatever means necessary. And this is something that's not unique to motorcycles. And I want to say, one of the magazines that I subscribe to is a vintage guitar magazine. And oftentimes in the classified section in the back of the magazine, you'll have people saying, hey, I sold this guitar years ago. This is the serial number. I really regret selling it. If anyone has this or knows about this guitar with the serial number, I'm willing to pay a premium to get it back. And paying a premium to get it back is oftentimes the key here, right? I don't think Snehal should feel obligated to sell the motorcycle back. However, if he's interested in selling it back, he should think of a number that makes sense for him. And oftentimes, that number is going to be a premium over what the buyer would be able to go out and just buy average run-of-the-mill 1981 R100 RT is going to cost, right? Like, there's going to be a bit of a premium with, like, I'm coming and this is the specific bike or thing that I want. I think the expectation there is that that's going to come with a bit more of a price tag.
I don't have a whole lot to add to that, other than the fact that it sounds suspiciously like Spurgeon is in the market for an R100 RT. First, you say, it's really not that difficult to find someone's work email address. It's super easy. You just go on LinkedIn. I mean, hypothetically, you could just go on there and find their address and maybe find out where they lived. And then you say, I would do anything to get back a motorcycle that I had sold. So you've got a bit of a Liam Neeson Taken vibe where you're leaving this guy voicemails.
I said I could understand. Did I say that? I might have said that. You. I did say that. No, if there was a bike that I would have sold, hypothetically, and I've used air quotes a lot in this, and I realize that
air quotes are great for a podcast.
Yeah, most of you are listening on a podcast. But I'm not saying that I am the person in this, and I
but
think
you're not saying it.
Most of our listeners know that I have never owned a 1981 R100 RT. So
if this was a VFR, we would be very suspicious.
Exactly. Well, actually, so it was funny. The person that I sold the VFR to reached out to me a couple years after I sold him the bike, and he was getting into motorcycling when I sold him the VFR, and then he had somehow then gotten into our content and realized that the guy that he bought the VFR from was Spurgeon at RevZilla, which he didn't realize at the time of buying the bike. And he actually reached out to me a few years later and was like, "Hey man, I just want to let you know, like, I'm still riding it. I bought some other motorcycles as well, and I like your content. I had no idea who you were when I bought the bike." And it was a nice exchange, but I think it wasn't awkward. It wasn't weird that, like, he had, found my email back in his history of emails years later and followed up with me with an email. So,
or that he like digs through your trash, or keeps a lock of your hair around his neck.
I've moved since when he bought that bike. So he bought that bike 3 houses ago. So I am no longer in the same house. So.
Where do you live now, Spurgeon?
I'm not going to make this that easy for you folks. You got to do a little digging and sleuthing on the internet, just like Snehal Stalker did. So Snehal, what I would say, wrapping this up, is that if you want to sell the bike, sell the bike, and
don't be afraid to charge a premium.
Exactly. Put a number on it that makes sense for you. And if you really don't want to sell the bike, don't sell the bike, and don't feel guilty about it. Like, hey man, I appreciate you reaching out. Bike's not for sale. I'm gonna let it go.
I would just add the one thing that my family likes to do in these situations, because we have a tendency to sell and exchange vehicles amongst ourselves, is you can always offer him the first right of refusal. So you can say, if you're really not interested in selling right now, you can tell him, hey, I'm sorry, man, I've got this vision for what I'm going to do with it, but if I ever do sell it, I promise I will bring it to you first. I won't just list it on the public market. And sometimes that's a bit of an olive branch that can, smooth that situation over.
So as we round out the episode, we like to do a little, what did you learn today? And transitioning into that, because you just mentioned your family, what if your dad was shopping for a dual sport motorcycle right now?
Okay.
What dual sport motorcycle would he be shopping for?
That's you're making it personal, bringing my family into this, man.
No. You opened the door. I'm just using. I've been watching a lot of Law and Order lately, and I know that because you are the one that brought your family into this, it makes it on the table from a judge's standpoint. So all legalities are covered, and we're in the clear at this point. What motorcycle would your dad be shopping for right now if he was shopping for a dual sport motorcycle?
It pains me to say in front of Spurgeon, but my father is indeed currently searching for an 890 Adventure. He's really looking for an 890 Adventure R Rally, because Sean Robert, only the best of the best, if he's going to go out and ride in the desert 3 times a year, he needs it to be top of the line. So yes, lo and behold, another KTM will probably come into the Robert family at some point, and Spurgeon will get his commission, as always, every time a KTM is sold.
So I just want to publicly acknowledge that was hard for you, and I
was.
appreciate it. But Mr. Robert, if you are listening, there is an open invitation extended to you to come out, hang out in Philadelphia with me, and you are welcome to ride my KTM 890 rally anytime you want. Maybe next year for Get On Adventure Fest, he can come out and I'll let him rip it around there. But yeah, come and ride the Pine Barrens with us.
Well, people are blackout drunk from all the shots they just had to take with all that KTM talk. So yeah, to your point, Spurgeon, what did we learn today?
We've learned that the definition of a dual sport motorcycle is something that is a bit murky, and it's something that maybe the three of us still can't even agree on. But it is something that allows you to travel both on and off road, and it's something that brings us enjoyment in a way that a regular non-dual sport motorcycle might not be able to bring us. What do you think? What is your big takeaway for the day?
I feel pretty good about my definitions that, and this, to be clear, these are technical definitions. So this might help you if you are reading an article, if you're talking to someone about these categories of bikes. This is probably what people are talking about. That if someone says, I have a dual sport, they probably mean I have a motorcycle that is very dirt oriented that has been made street legal. And if they say I have an adventure bike, they have most likely a motorcycle that is a bit more street oriented to begin with, but has been made by the manufacturer to be very dirt capable. So they're sort of inverses of one another, but the Venn diagram has a lot of overlap. And I think the most important takeaway with all of that is basically don't stress about it. Don't get offended. Don't get all twisted up if someone uses this term or that term. Just go ride your bike, have fun, and most importantly, ride this category of motorcycle because it will make you a better rider. If you have been dual sport or ADV curious, give in to that curiosity because I think it'll bring a lot of depth to your motorcycling experience and it'll just generally bring you a lot of joy.
Other things I've learned, Spenser Robert has an ego that knows no bounds. And Xanon is the benefactor of that with the free t-shirt. I have learned that Spenser Robert does a smash-up job of filling in for Zach Quartz while Zach Quartz is off learning how to change a diaper. And, in general, I've just had a very enjoyable experience talking about dual sport motorcycling. It's a category that I very much enjoy. And if you have not already seen it, head over to the RevZilla YouTube channel and check out Where the Road Ends, which is full of all kinds of adventures on a quintessential dual sport motorcycle, the KLR 650.
Indeed.
So without any further ado, please feel free to leave a comment below if you're watching this on YouTube. Do send an email to highsidelowside@revzilla.com. Send us your questions, your concerns, your arguments, your disagreements. We want to hear it all. And then if you're lucky enough, we'll pick your comment, we'll argue with you publicly, and we'll argue with you in the best way possible because you won't get to argue back. It'll just be us telling you why we agree or disagree with you. So without any further ado, Spenser, any final last words for the audience?
No, I don't think you mentioned compliments enough in the comment section. Send compliments. That's just compliment us. It's so effective. And I'm not going to, likely be invited back anytime soon, so I won't be here to be able to really receive those compliments, but I'll know deep down in my heart. And
so if you have compliments for Spenser, we'll make sure to forward those emails directly along to him. Our producer Chase is making a note right now to just send automatic forwards of any mention of Spenser Robert right along to his email address.
But yeah, no, that's it. This was a good chat. It's, as I said in the beginning, I think it's been it's a simple question with kind of a complicated answer, but can't imagine two better fellas to unpack it with than you and our buddy Patrick Garvin.
You are too kind. You were absolutely a pleasure to have on the podcast today, Spenser. Until next time, when Zach will be back joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thank you for joining us for another episode of High Side, Low Side. I'm Spurge, and in the meantime, enjoy the ride.